as we started to develop hip hop, which was, we didn't realize at the time, was a cultural revolution. We wanted to be respected. We wanted to be classy. We wanted to be clean. We wanted to have our own language, our own art. Like the art, it's just who we are as a people of the Caribbean. If you allow the culture to come out from each of us, we will be the dancers, we'll be the singers, we'll be the artists. So we went from tagging to trying to piece. Like piece is short for masterpiece. Once you get into that, it was like, it's an addiction. You got to see your name everywhere. And the community was starting to like it. People were starting to like it. Newspapers are taking pictures of these masterpieces. Macy's came back for the release and hired me to do the windows, which I feel my responsibility is to represent those that can't represent. My art is their art. You understand?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they next to Picasso. You know? Yeah, it drains me when I do an art piece. It's not just an art piece to me. It's my soul.
Welcome back to the KultureKast podcast. My guest today is an artist and graffiti legend from New York. He goes by the name of Sen-1. Welcome, George Morillo. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Nice to meet you. Pleasure.
How's life in America at the moment? It's some turbulent times with COVID, and you've just had this freak election happened. Where what's the situation like?
Well, I live in Manhattan still, on the lower part of Harlem, on the west side, and it's just a different planet. Manhattan is a different place than all of America. So what you guys see and the world see on the news is not the reality. I'm on the ground. So like, I won't say that there's not like something going on, but it's not the way people think. Like half of us don't walk around with masks. You can't really social distance in Manhattan. Manhattan never really closes down. I mean, it does for a little bit, but like you have people who like right away open up the restaurants on the sidewalks, and so it's really like you get to see the hypocrisy. Like you got 50 people on the sidewalk with all these tables eating, and people walking by you, even homeless people and dogs. And so it's like here you get kind of like a different perspective than what the world is seeing in Manhattan. There's still the private schools have been open. They have these little private independent schools that have a lot of money. They've been open for months while the rest of the public schools are closed. So it's a real class thing. And then my area has been so gentrified. And so you still get everything. You get, the poor class, and then you get the richer class. I'm right on, near 96th Street on the west side. So we have Central Park and Riverside. So it's like a different situation. So it's hard to explain, but it's not what you really see in the news. It's kind of like, you get really like a reality of what's going on, and it makes you question everything. Like,
yeah, no, 100%. I feel like what we see on TV is always going to be like the clickbait, essentially. Do you know what I mean? That's what it's all become nowadays. But what I do like to do at the beginning of each podcast is sort of take a trip down memory lane, because it's a KultureKast podcast. Talk to me about your cultural background. What was like growing up in New York, and all of these things of your sort of childhood and your background.
Absolutely. All right. So I was born in 1968, right across the street from where I'm at. So I'm on 94th Street in Amsterdam. I was born actually I wasn't born in it, but I was living in a tenement during, like I said, 1968. People do their research. New York was burnt down to the ground. It was one big ghetto. And that was purposely done systematically. It was done by landlords. And it was based on race a lot. Once, you had the Harlem Renaissance, it was always whenever people of color in this country kind of like was doing well independently, somehow the system threw something in the way. So I grew up in the era when heroin epidemic from the Vietnam War and stuff flooded the streets, and it destroyed, like, let's say Harlem Renaissance. Harlem was incredible. You had the theaters, you had all the musicians, you had really expensive areas. And then, so that's when my mother was here, before she had me. And by the time she had me, there was already like that 10 years, it was like the city was burnt down. The rebels, the landlords end up burning down everything, getting insurance money and then pretty much created this thing called urban development, which was pre-gentrification plan. So we end up, ironically, and that's probably why I'm so conscious of the system. I'm born in what's the largest, the foundation urban development of what would be gentrification, which then wherever I travel, I see the same the same pattern. You
Yeah.
understand, of how they clear out, how they use people, especially of color and people of a lower class, poor white people as well, to fill these areas. And they'll have like a 20, 30, 40-year plan. And within that plan, the system is figuring out how to make us dependent. They don't really want us independent. So they want us dependent, whether it's on drugs, whether it's on welfare, whether it's some public assistance system, because then the tax money rotates within those plans and everybody makes money, but then the poor stays poor and become more dependent of the system. And then once you depend on the system could do a lot to you. And so then growing up in the rubbles of that, there was big buildings being built with taxpayer money for low income and middle and lower middle class to fill in these areas. So they burnt down blocks and blocks and they left it for years in rubble. And then I grew up in that. So I grew up with watching buildings being burnt down, playing in abandoned buildings, playing in empty lots and a lot of crime. But it wasn't like crime where people were just killing each other. It wasn't like that. It was like survival crimes. There was a lot of 3-car Monties in the street, hustlers. There was a lot of chain snatching, purse snatching. Like you had to really develop instincts in those days to survive. It was the concrete jungle. So there was wild dogs in the street. It was like New York was a totally different place. You go to Times Square, there was a lot of prostitution, even in my area. But it wasn't like the way people see it today. It was like if you see movies like Taxi Driver, things like The Warriors. Warriors was filmed like down the block from me. So there was gang territories. So that's what ended up happening. When this happened, the people kind of like, in a way, organized themselves. And what would happen is every few blocks had an outlaw gang at those times. And those are the ones that mimic almost, you see them in all the old pictures, like Warriors. They had their own little gimmick, their own little thing. And they all wore like vests and like motorcycle gang type things, but without the motorcycle. Some did. And you had in the Bronx. And so that's how I lived first. So everything was territorial. So my area, we had the Sandmans. And then later on in the early 70s, when I moved up the block, there was La West Side Familia, which was an offspring of a Brooklyn outlaw gang called La Familia. So that was that bigger gang brotherhood. So these neighborhoods were actually, these gangs didn't necessarily, they were outlaws. So they were totally outside the system, but they didn't prey on the neighborhood. They got high, they were more rebellious, but they were really vicious and they protected the neighborhood. So you was kind of like protected. It was because the police wasn't on our side. They were actually the ones bringing the drugs in and control. Because remember, this is the mob era too. So it was like organized crime with the police department was totally against us. So the community, and that's where the non-snitching stuff came from. It didn't come from like today where people doing crime and you don't tell the police. It was a different world. We pretty much like protected ourselves and cleaned our neighborhoods out. So if you was like, there was not pedophiles or rapists in our neighborhoods, none of that stuff, because as soon as everybody knew each other. And as soon as somebody behaved like that, the neighborhood will rally again, and you get handled. They tell you either you had to move or they'll move you, you know what I mean? Yeah. But that wasn't really allowed. So kids can actually run around and be outside all day and pretty much be safe. And then we ran in like a pack of wolves, like kids were always together. So then it comes from that, and then we developed, going into the late 70s, the outlaw gangs, a lot of their culture, because we grew up under it, we developed a lot of their stuff. So you get the Black Spades that were in the Bronx, that were like the biggest gang, which like the Warriors depict them as the big black gang that you see at the end and all that stuff. That was actually what became Africa Bambaataa and Zulu Nation. So as we started to develop hip hop, which we didn't realize at the time was a cultural revolution, but the outlaws laid down a lot of the foundations. So they had a war dance, which they mimicked their rumbles, because it was like West Side Story. Like when I got involved with gangs, you got picked to fight and you'll meet in the yard. The two rivals and two gangs would go, and if it, and then they'll determine if it was going to be knives. It depends the seriousness, how it was going to be. But most of the time, you fought like pretty much every day. You fought for your space. Somebody looked at you. So it was at different times, but it was good. It was
Sounds crazy.
Yeah, but it was good. It made us really hard. It made us like from a really young age. you knew how to survive. You knew you had top instincts. Like it was
I
incredible.
was gonna say, like, there's something about like even like if you go to like London here, which is like obviously the capital, and New York for yourself, there's something when you go there where that hustle and bustle is just that tiny bit raised. Do you know what I mean? Like people there, I think, are a bit more just like on top of things, and but when we see like New York, especially for me, like I see it a lot in movies, a lot of American culture and Hollywood is very much, even in the UK, is like a massive thing when you're growing up, and it's really easy to sort of, I guess, romanticize the situation back then. But the way you're explaining it is like, yeah, I've seen this in a movie like hundreds of times, but when you actually say you're living through it, it's a completely different situation. Like, how was that like impacting you and how you went forward?
Well, it was like it was a movie, and again, every moment of the day was a movie, which made it exciting, but it also made it hard. Growing up in a tenement, especially having a mother, of color, and coming from the Caribbean. Look, she had a breed lighter with me and my brother, only because she felt like, the darker that we will be, the more of a problem we're going to have in life. So that shows you the psychological survival.
Did you feel that?
Hmm?
Did you feel that growing up?
Oh, absolutely. Well, we didn't have, like nowadays, they split us up with Latino, Hispanic, none of that stuff made sense. We was just the N-word, to mostly white people. We was all of us. It didn't matter. I had a little afro. We all had our hairs and afros. We was pretty natural. So we didn't really have a distinction. You pretty much you judged each other by the energy, if they were going to be a threat or not. So, and that's why hip hop coming out of, especially my area, was really diverse early on. That's why I feel like the world could embrace it, is because it is the world. It was created by kids that were from every background. Of course, we had the African bloodline within us all that connects us, from here, from colonization and stuff like that, and the indigenous bloodline. So of course it was easy for us to all connect once we was left alone. But yeah, it was a combination of those type of movies without the like you said, the glorification. It was just life daily. Like there was times, the tenements, the winters we didn't have heat, so we would have to all bundle up with our full clothes on, and we didn't really have a lot of clothes. We would have, like, they show these early hip hop shows like on Netflix and stuff, and they get some of it right, but it's not right. We didn't have the money. The money with the gold chains and that part of hip hop, that comes once the mainstream got involved, as well as the drug trade. Prior to that, we was poor kids, and we had holes in our sneakers. We will have to wear hand-me-downs from your brothers, and neighbors gave each other stuff. It was almost completely third world. But because we felt the city was so dirty and everything was so dirty, my generation decided we want to be fly, and that's where that came from, fresh and fly. So all those things had meaning back then. It wasn't just slang that was made. They were actually living words, you understand? Like within us, how we wanted to perceive ourselves. And that getting rock bottom allows people to actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing, especially coming out of where we come out, because it allows us to regroup, and it allows the internal DNA memory of our ancestors and who we are to come out, you know what I'm saying? And it comes out in culture. And so dressing and hairstyles was almost a statement in which everybody looked down at us. We was like dirty people, it was like thrown away people, it was like the system was trying to just erase us. And that's what hip hop became, was a cry out, but it was also like a re-imaging of who we wanted to be. We wanted to be respected. We wanted to be classy. We wanted to be clean. We wanted to have our own language, our own art. We wanted to dictate our own, selves in this type of situation, instead of being like classified by a system that actually caused these situations. So that's what we did. We would take we'll have maybe, the beginning of the school year, your mother would take, every kid would get taken to get a new outfit to start school. And in Easter, those are the 2 times a year. And maybe in Christmas, you might get a sweater or 2 from a family member, right? So you end up taking those clothings, and you probably have maybe three pair of pants. I'm talking now coming into my early teens, going into junior high school, and the fashion stuff started to come out. And we would buy 1 pair of sneakers, like, it'd be expensive. Like, let's say we bought we went from Pro-Keds to like Converse or some, or British Walkers and stuff. And what we'll do is that's why the fat laces came in, and we'll keep our sneakers clean. We'll put fat laces in to match our different color laces to match our clothing. So what we did was we circulated our clothes. So if you had 3 pair of pants, let's say, and 2 or 3 pairs of shirts to go to school, you would know how to coordinate it. So you would get different colors. So we would, like Lee's were these colored jeans we would wear. This is early hip hop. So we would get like burgundy, baby blue, navy blue, and then, or something like that. And then get shirts that were like burgundy. We'll get peach color, again, like a baby blue or whatever it was. And then what you do is just, you had to know how to coordinate them so that every day it looked like you had a fresh new gear, but you was actually just wearing the same clothes, just styling it different. So then you match the laces with the shirt. And then, so that's really how it was back then. And it made us really creative. And then we'll put out jeans, you know, we took time out for this. It was really a cultural movement, and we lived it. That's the difference with today. And we would take our jeans and overnight put them underneath the mattress, develop a nice crease. In the morning you come out. It was really important to look fresh. You couldn't go to school. Like hip hop was really like judgmental back then. If you wanted to be in that circle, like you had to be on top of your game. Not everybody, see today people could just wake up and say, I'm hip hop. I listen to hip hop music. I dress like this. It wasn't like that. Like it was a community. Like you had to be known. You had to be tied into different crews. Like even in graffiti, you know, you could write on the wall. It didn't mean you was a graffiti writer. Like you had to be acknowledged by the community and by different graffiti crews. And then you worked your way to being a graffiti writer. But if you didn't have that, there was a system where we would toy people, put toy meant that you wasn't down or you was totally whack. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was a system we regulate ourselves. You couldn't just do that. You couldn't go to these underground parties to break dance if you wasn't a part of like the scene. You'd get beat up. Like it was crazy.
So
but it was good.
How did you sort of get involved into that scene then? Like what was your first introductions? As you say, like obviously you came from the era where hip hop was evolving and created, but then how was your sort of first introductions and how did you get into that scene?
I grew up in it. I got privilege. It was in I'm in Lower Harlem, right? Which was Broadway 96th Street, 95th Street was the biggest Afro Latin jazz area, which had all these clubs. Of course, they knocked it all down because it represented us. Then we have 125th Street further up, which is main Harlem. 135th Street is a bridge that ties us into, you could walk right into the South Bronx. So that whole connection was there. And then, like I said, then you could go down like 60-something Street. Like I was in a unique situation. So you could go down like 60-something Street is Lincoln Center. And that was a community of Puerto Rican community that they pushed out and knocked it all down to build Lincoln Center, gentrification. And then you could keep going down further down. You got 42nd Street, Times Square. Then you keep going down to the Village, and that's how Basquiat's and all of them. So it was a different situation. You could actually, and those territories wasn't really gang territories once you got there. Like Times Square had like pimps and drug dealers and stuff, but it wasn't regulated by a certain gang because it wasn't really a community. It was more of a commercial area. So we could travel in those areas. But in these areas, you kind of like, if you didn't know somebody in another neighborhood or have a family member, you wasn't just walking into another neighborhood. They had borders. Like our border was 96th Street. So and there was literally a whole building there with people sitting outside all day long, all night, and same way on our side. And you couldn't really cross. Yeah, no, it wasn't really, it's just that people didn't have nothing, like they just hung out. Everybody just hung out on their block. And there was so many people at that time, especially of color. I mean, they wiped everybody out. I mean, I watched the system wipe out a lot of people with the crack epidemic, the war on drugs, AIDS, all that stuff. Even now, I'm watching how the seniors are being wiped out here with the COVID. But that gets into people thinking it's all conspiracy theories. But when you lived it and you see the change in these areas and how it was done. See, to me, hip hop, because it was developed by kids, to me, I call it the glitch in the matrix. I don't think I would have been there. All of us, we was on the chopping block. We was done. We was finished. Like that's why everything was burnt down. We was made to be just wiped out. And then the gentrification would have came in and everything would have been smooth and nobody would even know we existed. So with us, with hip hop, actually, I think stopped the process. It caused the system to have to evaluate itself, and it took time before they could capture it and put it in the music industry and then change the message. And now you see what the message is: it's self-destruction. It's pretty much one of the major causes of our youth killing each other is the music. You're constantly listening to something that degrades you, you know, and even the frequency's been changed. We used to always have the congas and have beats that were traditional to us, spiritual to us. Now it's been like this crazy frequencies.
No,
and
it's
also
808s.
yeah, it's crazy. And also the message. If you have young people just listening to that all the time, we didn't refer to ourselves with the N word and the B words. Because like I said, people will fight. We refer to ourselves as kings, gods, goddesses, queens, B, ski. Like, you know, you had different nicknames, but you couldn't really come out. Like, that was like an older Harlem thing. You would hear some of the older guys use the N word, but the younger kids didn't really use that at that time. And, you know, and then we had knowledge of self, which the older people, because of the civil rights movement, before it got dismantled, we grew up in that as well. So we had a lot of knowledge of who we was and where we came from and what had happened to us. So that was being fed to us constantly. So when we produced hip hop, it was a rebellion, you know, from young people, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm.
Sort of represents your identity. Do you know what I mean? Like you're clinging on to your identity and you're trying to make something new out of it. The topic on the N word is an interesting one because obviously it is used so heavily in music. And there's an artist here called Akala. I don't know if you know of him. He's AKALA.
Sounds familiar. Yeah, I'm sorry.
He's really like he's a literary, I would say. He's more like than a like a rapper. I would say he's like a poetic person sort of thing. Like he's given speeches at Oxford University on like the history of where Black people come from and originated and how their culture's been as you say, sort of culturally appropriated, I would say. And he did at the beginning of his music career use the N word quite heavily, as a lot of kids sort of do when they're getting into that hip hop.
Myself.
But he goes that he sort of read more into the meaning of the word, the history attached, the blood that is attached to that word, and that's what made him stop using it. And for me, like growing up, I had an older brother who would always listen to Biggie, 50 Cent, sort of that era, early 2000s, because I was born in 96. So when my first sort of cognitive like memories of music are very much like Biggie, 50 Cent, and sort of Eminem and that sort of era of hip hop and rap, and that was just littered with the word. And for me, it's a bit of a weird one because like for me, there's nostalgia attached to that music because it's the music I love and grew up with, but there's also like that word's used so frequently, and it's sort of losing its value, if that makes sense.
Well, I think it was a couple of things because even KRS-One recently broke down a history on which in Africa, in back in the days, it was actually used because of there's a country I think is not
Niger
and stuff like that. That it was actually a word of power, like for elites. So, but the thing is that what we got to do is study where it comes from here when it was used towards us, and it wasn't used in a way whether you're a king or not. It wasn't. It was used to really degrade, you know, people of color, Black people at that, you know what I mean? Like my experience as a kid going to a store, they would use it to, you know, like let's say white Caucasian person, they would use it towards us, but it was in a messed up way. It was a degrading way. But then going again, the power of hip hop, and I think Tupac, who purposely was taken out, didn't have a chance to really evolve, but he was on the right path he was on the right path and also on the wrong path because when it came to that, because he didn't get to fulfill his just like Malcolm X and King and them, they never got to fully evolve right when they were about to, you know what I mean? Which would have been a whole different thing. I mean, Tupac was talking about running for president and stuff like that and having an independent party. You know, that's what he was working at towards before he died and breaking off of death row and having his own label. He was going vegan. There was a lot of stuff that Tupac was doing that people don't know. You know, he was settling down with one girl the night that he got murdered. He was actually in a hotel with, I think it was Quincy Jones' daughter. I'm thinking, can't remember, but as somebody to that effect. So none of these people got to fulfill what they were trying to build towards. But Tupac was one of the first ones that really made it NIGGA, and then never ignorant getting goals accomplished. So even with that, and that's where it got stuck at, because he never got fully to really push that point, because the negativity, you have 100 other rappers coming out and they using it the other way. You know what I mean? You got this one conscious person that's trying to change it, and give it a different definition. Just like the swastika symbol. I mean, as you know, that comes from, is a symbol of peace. That comes from cultures from Asian and Indian culture, which see how it got changed? And that's the same way I think he was trying to do with that word. So you get a confusion in the streets when it came to that in New York, where you had conscious people not using nigger and saying nigga because it was like a rebellion way. But then, of course, the music industry corrupted it, and now it's just negativity. It doesn't really, because there's nobody to break it down in a positive way. You know what I'm saying? So for me, my experience was, I was using it because I grew up in the streets again, in gangs and all that stuff. And I came up through all the levels of the streets, and it became popular to use, you know, within our conversations on the street. But when a few years ago, I went to Tanzania, Africa to work on a project, a charity project. I'll do a lot of charity work, especially around the hip hop culture, because I believe that the earlier tools that saved us, like I told you, not what people get, not the industry stuff, but the culture itself and the 4 physical elements, and now has branched off to other elements, but also the main one, which is knowledge of self. And then you combine these skills, I believe it can help every poor community or poor kids, because the unique thing with hip hop is that it solves your problems and it generates energy, and you begin to, and it's so incredible because it was such a movement that just, it was spontaneous. It was done pure. It wasn't like Black Lives Matter or do protest. It wasn't about somebody telling you how to protest, how to rebel. It was like organically from the youth that was left alone somewhere, and we developed something. So what we did was, not only was it the appearance to look fly and to carry ourselves like kings and queens from our past, and to be respected and to be tough, be able to fight no matter what. Like we fight, I'll go against anybody, even to this day. It's like, I'm really peaceful, but if I get challenged by anything, like I don't care. It could be an army and I know I'm gonna die. It doesn't matter. You know, I lived on ground. Yeah. I'm just not, you're not gonna disrespect me or walk all over me. That's not gonna happen. It's just in my DNA. And that's how we carried ourselves. It wasn't that we would go out and attack people. That came more of the drug thing, but it was a pride that we had that was worth dying for. And so what hip hop had developed was its own, every skill is a battle component. And that's where the rap thing comes from, where people think they're boasting, but it's not necessarily that. It was used, this was, like I said, it was different. We wasn't doing it to make records. We wasn't doing it to please other people. We was doing it to survive. So instead of having a fight all the time, every component has a battle element. So you could battle each other with the same energy, the same intensity, the same vibrations as a real fight, but never touch each other. So breakdancing comes from a dance the Outlaws created, which mimicked their war dance, which they would mimic stabbing each other and fighting like West Side Story type thing. And then that developed into the down floor rock, and then eventually then the spin and all that. But it was always developed to battle each other. So if two area crews, because the gangs became crews, had a conflict, they didn't necessarily have to get physical, even though the energy would be so high. We were so used to fighting. Some fights would break out, but this helped us from actually going into full rumbles and fights where we could go to a dance and battle each other. And then the neighborhoods, and choose their winner. And then you could walk out of there like, yeah, I beat them. But then they had a chance to come back and beat you again. It was intelligent. It wasn't like today where you kill somebody or you hurt somebody, they can never come back. Here, it allowed you to fight and then come back even better because you would go home and practice. The same thing with graffiti. You could challenge a graffiti writer for his name. You could go and battle within the community and challenge, let's say you're a writer, I could challenge you and we'll go to the wall and battle, and I could take your name or you could take my name. So that's like killing you. Like if I put in a year of work, 2 years, I finally get accepted into this community and stuff like that in this world. And then all of a sudden my name is taken, that's equivalent to you dying. But I could go back and practice and practice and practice and come back and challenge that person and not only take my name, but probably take his name. You understand? But that didn't last too long. That's a small segment in hip hop, because then crack was flooded the streets and then became the drug trade. So we're talking that's about a couple of years in the early stages of hip hop that we had that type of system. The DJ, the same thing. You could battle every element. The MCs come out of massive ceremonies, but then eventually it developed into the rap thing where people battled. So you see the earlier stuff. So it was like, so that's how it was. Me growing up in it, I saw that whole cycle. And then my brother was 7 years older than me. He's one of the founders of Zoo York, and he was forced, because we didn't have fathers, he was forced to have to take me along everywhere he went. So this is really early. This was pre-hip hop. So there was graffiti writers and skateboarders. So he was part of building the first ramps in New York, and with Andy Kessler, Bopples, and all them. It was Zoo York. Eventually the clothing line got taken. The name got taken for a clothing line. But the original crew was pre-hip hop. There was skateboarders and graffiti writers. You know, so I grew up with that, you know what I mean? And then my brother was early first generation graffiti writer. And then I come in more of the last generation of the trains, I should say. He's the first generation of the trains, not graffiti, but the train graffiti writers. And I come in at the last generation of the graffiti train writers. So
that's it's incredible to hear, because like, as I say, like we especially in the UK, so removed from it, we see like a certain image, do you know what I mean? But I like how you sort of mentioned there that hip hop's was the methods of battling were actually like a peaceful alternative. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like it's more of like a way to not get into actual physical violence, but substitute it with things that you can work on and like hone your craft, whether that be with words or with dancing or like anything, even graffiti. I do want to sort of hone into the graffiti side of things, because obviously that's.
But can I just say one more thing on that?
Mm-hmm.
Also, which was ingenious. Sorry to jump in. Well, also what was genius about it was that you could actually fall in love with people, not necessarily the physicalness. Mm-hmm. So it's like we have beat girls and stuff like that. You could actually like be at a jam and watch this young girl like, and not showing her body, you know, wearing the same clothes we wear, and because she could move and do a thing or be a graffiti writer, you could actually fall in love with her because of that, and vice versa. So it also went beyond what the stuff that society is trying to figure out today. We kind of like figured it out. If they left it alone, we was on the path of actually creating a better world where art and stuff was coming in. So it's a spiritual attachment. Like you could watch a female DJing, for instance, and just like be mesmerized, and next thing you know, you got these hearts in your eyes because of what she did, not because of what she, you know, showing her butt and dancing. It wasn't like that. It was about respect. The other thing was when you talked about, so the N-word, I'm sorry, I jumped off the topic real quick, was a couple years ago with an organization from the UK called The Last Night DJ Saved My Life. They do incredible stuff. They get music equipment. They raise tons of money in countries like India and Africa and these places. And they take a lot of the poor communities and they build water wells and water systems. They whatever is needed. So in Tanzania, I had the opportunity through a friend of mine in Leeds, another artist, to get together with a couple other artists, which one is my friend Nicholas Dixon, and then the other one was Inky, who's well known. He's one of the early graffiti writers of the UK. And Chapter, I think his name is, I'm forgetting everything, I'm getting old. But anyway, we went as a team and they had raised money to build in this compound called Angel's Gate, which picks up these street boys from the streets. Pretty much they thrown away out there. Like you could pretty much snatch up a kid in the street and do whatever you want to them. There's like they pretty much like what I described when I was growing up, but a little bit worse. Where these are throwaway kids. They build this compound, they hold like maybe they give housing, but it was really poor. So the Last Night DJ Saved My Life raised enough money to build a music school and music equipment. And for the first time, we was able as visual artists to get involved, in which we flew out there and we painted the murals and we ended up teaching classes. We taught the kids how to silk screen. We taught them how to do graffiti. We taught them all kinds of stuff. And now they're doing excellent. But during that, the reason I'm bringing this up is because that visit and working, you know, and I'm the only person of color in that whole group. So obviously the kids love everybody. But, you know, I had this thing with, you know, me coming from America, everybody else is from the UK, me being who I am. And then my energy as well. I had a couple of the kids, you know, we didn't understand the language, but I understand them. You know, we come from that street, you know, you feel the vibe. You know, it's kind of like you don't even need words at that point. But two of the kids brought me outside, and the culture was so beautiful out there. Like, as much as they were street kids, their heart was incredible. You know what I mean? They were pure, very pure. You know what I mean? Even through everything they've been through, some of them been raped, they got HIV, some of them had HIV, you know, some of them, you know, was on heroin addiction since they were little, like 6, 7 years old. And yeah, their energy was incredible, still so pure. It reminded me of my situation. Anyway, I'll go through it quickly. Two of the kids brought me outside and they started rapping. And they, you know, that whole rhythm that they have is amazing. It's like, they go at all. And they're not rapping like here, right? But then it came to a point where I'm in the flow and they start nigga, 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 and it just was like, I couldn't believe it. It crushed me. It was like, oh man, it hit my heart hard. I had to stop. And I was like, no, 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 no. Don't say that. Don't say that. I had to like really stop it because it was like oil and water. It just didn't mix with who they were. Here they are smiling, but I got to see how much we're actually messing up the world with the culture that's coming here, with a culture that could actually heal the world. You understand? Mm-hmm. So from that moment on, I had an awakening, like Richard Pryor, like I would never use the word again. You know what I mean? Because as soon as I got to Tanzania, the first thing that was said to me, welcome home, brother. You know, and I end up kissing the ground because that is part of my bloodline as well, coming from the Caribbean. So to have that purity and then seeing how that negativity almost destroyed the whole trip in my mind in a way. You understand what I'm saying? So 100%. the impact of these pure, beautiful children with just these words, that because the energy with the words that we was releasing from here, from a culture that I've been a part of and I helped nurture, you know, crush me to the point where I won't use the word ever again, you know.
No, 100%. I probably understand it more than many, as you know, like I'm Indian, but I'm born in the UK. And as I've already mentioned, listen to Biggie and 50 Cent. They're still my two favorite artists listening to, because that's like my childhood growing up. Watching Fresh Prince and My Wife and Kids on TV. Like, American culture is global. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's all over the world, and it's something that I grew up listening to, watching, loving. I was probably more into American culture than I was into UK culture. Like, I would watch Space Jam with Michael Jordan, and I wanted Jordans, and Fresh Prince, My Wife and Kids. As I say, like, all these things were a very. It was a hip. I was probably raised in more of like a hip hop environment, even though I'm nowhere near hip hop. It's like that's the only segment of my life that I'm near it is through music and TV. So 100% I understand it, because again, as a child, when I'm listening to the word, I don't know what it means. I just know that it's at the end of every sentence. So you end up regurgitating it until you find out you shouldn't regurgitate it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Until you get a reality check too, until you offend somebody, and then all of a sudden it's like a fist fight or something to that effect. But yeah, you're right.
Exactly.
But it's innocent. It comes from a place of innocence, and that's what bothers me a lot.
And ignorance. I think ignorance is I think, because when you educate yourself and sort of understand the meaning of it, that's when you sort of realize the weight of the word. And it's a similar situation with the word Paki here. So the P word. It's and when I sort of listen to the N word, if I replace it with the P word in this instant, I would be offended. So that's sort of how I like sort of my first sort of reality check.
But that's also when I got involved with the Panthers. That was the other thing too, was that I was around a lot of older brothers and sisters that lived a time when they were being lynched, you know, still, you know, here in America. And that word wasn't like a popular word. It was really like, it came with you being burnt alive, you being raped, you being, you know, lynched. So even with them, I could see the pain. You know, I wasn't paying so much mind back then because we caught up in the popular, but I had people check me on it that was older, but I was in the street culture. And I did make a change when I was involved with the Panthers because of that, because I got to see this older generation that actually would hurt them. It wasn't just like, and it was letting them down, like a younger generation using it and some coming to it to when they lived a time when it was used as a spear, you know, to really, really physically hurt them or move them out of areas and you know, really, you know, harm them. So yeah, you have all that came to play with me, all that, but it was really those kids over there seeing the power of being, you know, like, you know how long the flight is to get from America to Africa. Shit, that's like a far journey, and to go that far, and being in a place like Tanzania, so rural in a way that it reminded me of the Caribbean when I was a kid, and still, like I said, still pure. People still growing food, growing off the land. There's still community, and you know, it's considered to be third world area, something like that. But to me, it's not. It's still first world, because it's where the foundations are. And like I said, I grew up in that as a kid, going back to the islands. So I felt at home. But again, I saw how it was like oil to water, how it was already beginning to corrupt these kids that needed to actually not have to go through anything more that they already been through in life. You know, they already been through the hardest and worst things in life. And here, psychologically, now America's implanting something in their head that they don't really realize is gonna help destroy them, a path to destroy. Like I said, we refer to ourselves as kids. We refer to ourselves as God. Like 5%ers was a gang. Every crew that we started developing, like I said, the Black Spades became the Universal Zulu Nation. Everybody had a platform, a code of conduct. Every crew, every gang in my generation began to have a format and how you're supposed to behave and how you're supposed to act. And it was discipline. It was like mob. You join these families, it was like joining a mob family. You had to follow these rules if you're going to be down, and there was dire consequences. People could die behind, breaking certain rules. There'll be capital punishment on the street for stuff like that. So it was a serious game, but we all had to follow like a breakdown of who you was. So let's say 5%ers where Wu-Tang and them come out of, they based on mathematics. They based on themselves being 5% of the population that has knowledge of self, that understands what's going on. And they could, every single day, they had like a calendar in which every number led to a word, and it pieced out today, and that would be today's mathematics. And you had to know today's mathematics if you was gonna be a member. And if you wore, they had kufis. If you wore it, another 5%er, they greet each other as peace god, and the women was called Earths. They wasn't called, so we was considered, and so that again, being in the same neighborhood and being in different gangs and still being alliance and having friends, we all picked that up from the different gangs of that time, those mathematics, you understand, those lessons. Yeah. So we carried ourselves differently. So they were about, and they were tough, they could fight, but they carried themselves almost like the Nation of Islam, where their presentation was important and it was serious. So they would approach you, go to school, like let's say going to school, you see the different gangs approaching their members about the different rules or different things. It was always a test. You had to be on point, and you couldn't be high or drugged up. Like those time parties is different. You smoke a little joint, drink, some beers or whatever for, some kind of 40s or something. But it was basically you had to be clean to be in these gangs, and you had to be tough, and you had to be smart. They didn't.
Which again, sort of, it goes the opposite of what people think. Do you know what I mean?
It was flipped. Yeah. Like only the best could join these crews, these gangsters. You was representing them. So like 5%ers would be like, what's today's mathematics, God? And you had to know from the numbers of the date off the top of your head. You couldn't pause. Like you had to say, oh, peace, God, today's mathematics is blasey, blasey, blasey. Knowledge, wisdom, understanding to the whatever, right? If you didn't know it, boom, you got punched in your chest. You know what I mean? That was the thing. They'll cave your chest in these gangs. Like that's what they called it. I caved their chest in, boom, you get punched in the chest really hard. And then you get shooken up, scared, like, yo, you better know your shit tomorrow. I'm gonna come see you. These are older kids, telling you, you better know your mathematics tomorrow, boom, boom. And you go home, those kids will go home and study their shit, and that wouldn't happen again. You know what I mean? Because it was the fear that was put in you, but it also made you hard, solid, but it also made you aware how serious it was to have knowledge of self and how to carry yourself under these situations as a person of color in America. Like you had to have that discipline in order to survive. And that's what it meant. Like today is not there. They reversed that, but that's how we grew up.
It sounds almost like a double-edged sword. It's like there were a lot of benefits of actually having that culture there. Like I don't want to use the word gang culture because nowadays it is got like negative connotations. But in them days, what I'm trying to say is it sounded like it actually had, but it sounds like it had positive connotations back then. Another thing you touched on before, is that you went back to the islands, the Caribbean, quite a lot as a kid, and New York, from what I understand of it, is quite a melting pot of all these different sort of communities and cultures. How do you think your culture from the Caribbean impacted you when you were a kid, and then how much of it was also the influences of all the other different backgrounds that you were growing up with as well?
Well, all right. So for me, coming from originally it's called Quisqueya Haiti, which is Haiti and now is known as Dominican Republic. But it's original Arawak people, which is the rainforest indigenous people. We're just Indians on this whole side, so-called indigenous, but it's indigenous, So like you see the Native Americans and all this stuff. We all part of that whole family. the different climates we develop differently. So we rainforest people, and mostly like seafood and off the earth, while the mainland indigenous had the buffaloes and different. So we still the same bloodlines, but it's just separated prior to colonization. So what happens is though, when you have knowledge of self, and even the older, let's say African Americans, I hate using all these different
labels.
Yeah, and it's all made to divide and conquer, or Black community, whatever. You got a lot of the older G's that, because it wasn't as messed up as it was today. People, like I said, civil rights movement. If you came from the Caribbean, first of all, the slave trade, if you understand the history, it was the slave triangle. So they came from Africa, stopped at the Caribbean, where they would break the slaves down and then bring them to the Americas to then auction them off. But it was just everybody stopped through the Caribbean, coming through the African. That's why we have such a strong African culture, Afro-Caribbean type of culture. That's why you have what you have. But also what people didn't realize, like a lot of the so-called African Americans coming from down south, like I said, it was a mixing pot in Harlem, all claimed to, not all, but a lot claimed to the indigenous, saying, I have Cherokee in my family, I have Apache in my family. So it wasn't hard at that point to actually know that we was, just different languages from the oppressors, because English ain't our language here, Spanish ain't our language there, French ain't our language there. And in fact, in the Caribbean, like you have the Haitian community, which is that side of the island is colonized by France. The Haitian Revolution, their language is Patois, Creole, which is really just a mixture of the indigenous language with the French. The same thing with us. We don't speak Spanish. We speak a mixture of a dialogue like yuca and these different words. Those are original ancestry words, but they brainwashed us to think that's Spanish. And if you don't go to Spain, you don't realize you're not Spanish. You are what you are. You know what I'm talking about. So you get a reality check in that, where a lot of our people here are really confused and they divide themselves. But I never had that division, because coming out of the Caribbean, my family history, we could trace back to about 300 years, back, because my grandfather and my great grandfather, actually, it started with my great grandfather. So my mother had me at 41, which was kind of old, right? But my great grandfather, there was two militias that actually, this is pre-Dominican Republic, before, we talking about before that country separated. Remember, after the Haitian Revolution, they kicked the France out, Napoleon, they defeated Napoleon, kicked them out. And it was the only independent, so-called Black, piece of land in this side of the planet, you know what I mean? And so you have, my family was already tied in. My mother was tied in with that. She was, we was conscious of our African, our Blackness, our indigenousness. So she practiced that spiritually. And to this day, I still practice my spiritual ancestry that was passed down to her, which is at Elegua and stuff like that. Spiritually, I don't get into any of the churches stuff. I'm still connected to the ancestors. So back then it was different. Like it was really tied into that history, all this other stuff that would happen, of course, through history to make it Dominican Republic and divide people even more and put them against each other. She didn't really install that in me. We stood, the foundations were still there. So there was never really a question of, for me, like who I really was too much. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah, in society you did. You get even your own people say, oh, you this, you that. But as you come home, you kind of like knew who you was, you know what I mean? And that, I always had African statues and, Caribbean stuff, shells. I always wore shells around my neck. To this day, I still wear beads and even when I had the gold on, I'll have a bunch of shells around my ankle, bracelets, around my wrist. So it always stood with me. And when I became a member of Zulu Nation, they always had an African leather plaque that you would wear and stuff like that. So I never really had that, but I did get a lot of BS from non-conscious brothers and sisters that thought they was something else and thought that was less than them. And so you just learn to deal with it. And then as you get more educated, you're able to like drop bombs on them. They don't want to hear it. Like, wait a minute, you ain't Spanish, you ain't from Spain, you from the Caribbean. So you Caribbean descent, Hispanic means of Spanish descent. We're not Spanish descent. Spain came here. I didn't come from Spain. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. We're Caribbean descent. You know what I mean? So yeah, they came and conquered us, but that doesn't mean we came from that. And in Latin, that means Latino comes from Latin. And as you know, you're in Europe. That means the root of European language. Exactly. So this is the stuff that they've done to us to divide us. But, if you have knowledge of self, like I said, in hip hop, then all that is that none of that sticks. You know what I'm saying?
No, 100%, 100%. It is really interesting though, because obviously like the culture as we were talking about before, it's deeply rooted in every sort of art form. Like as we were saying before, is like the music and the clothes, the actual physical art of painting and things like that, which is what I'm trying to sort of transition into now, is how you got into art. So you mentioned it before that you with your brother when the skateboarders were around and a lot of the graffiti tagging and doing like the train graffitiing. How that was your first introduction? When did you actually start getting involved, and how did you sort of get into it a bit more seriously?
Well, it's in our blood, actually. My mother was a painter. So if you do a little, I don't want to get anybody upset, but like I've been to, Europe and the UK and London and all those places a lot. And in my mind, just studies things. Look at the dates. You see a lot of the progression in the UK after 1492. So even the art world, if you start to look at the dates, you'll tend to realize that all that was taken from this side of the world. Like it was the culture that the Europeans actually has rooted within, whether it's, as you know, from Indian background, how much of your culture is actually rooted from yoga to every meditation. It's heavily in the societies, but you don't really get the claim of it. You understand? It's almost as if these systems created this cultures and stuff in the same way with different entities and stuff as we see, even in Egypt and, which was Kemet, which is part of Africa, all of that. As we know, all of that, those societies were really advanced on medicine, science, astrology, naming the planets.
I have this conversation so much on this podcast, so much that they repackage it and sell it back to us.
Exactly. So the same thing with us. Everything that's made America or made this Western type of culture, and there's no disrespect, but it have to be honest, actually was taken from the experience here. Like I said, even the Caribbean, we was vegans. We didn't have meat. We didn't have pork. We didn't have chickens. You know what I mean? So we didn't eat that. We ate seafood, at that, and everything was fruits and vegetables. You know what I mean? We had it clean, and that's even in Columbus's logs. Like if you go back and read Columbus's logs, so really, like we didn't benefit from colonization or the West. They benefited, and we lost completely. So when you see the manifestation of what's happening, we have a DNA memory. And that's the problem with these societies. You could colonize us, but you can't really destroy that DNA memory. And Earth has a DNA memory. And that's why even people like us, as much as the system tries to erase, look, you still have indigenous Native American Indians here. You know what I mean? You still got the original indigenous people, the Mayans, who are now called Mexicans, but those are the Mayans in there. So you can't, as much as people have been killed off and the bloodlines been mixed, it keeps coming back. It's because nature has a DNA memory. The earth has a DNA memory. We're the people of the earth. We serve the earth, not to serve a system, not to serve a man, not to serve an idea. We here have, and that's what destroys our people in these type of environments, is that we out of place. We're being put in this artificial environment that's not necessarily not DNA makeup. So that's why people of color, especially in these poor neighborhoods, we kill each other. We kill each other. Why? Because it's a conflict. We're doing stuff that is going totally against our DNA makeup, but we don't know this, and nobody's telling us this. But this is what is driving us. So getting into what you were saying, like the art, it's just who we are as a people of the Caribbean. You go to the Caribbean, you see all the colors. Basquiat, what was Basquiat? You understand? From my same community, and he's a color genius. It's because that's just who we are. It's in our blood. So if you allow, and that's what hip hop did, if you allow the culture to come out from each of us, we will be the dancers, we'll be the singers, we'll be the artists, we'll be, you understand? We'll go back to making clothing, to making beads, to making incredible things. I mean, look at the native indigenous people on the mainland, and their clothing, their bead clothing was incredible, and using hemp to make their clothes. Even the Constitution is written on hemp paper, but that didn't come from the West. That came from practices that was already going on here by indigenous people. Smoking the peace pipe, what is that? That's cannabis, you understand?
Yeah.
You get coca leaves in Colombia, which helped, it was their medicine that helped them travel the mountains. And then later on, the West turned it into a drug and made it something bad. Again, this is not to disrespect, anybody's culture, but we have to speak real. Prior to colonizations, these things exist, but in a good way. You know what I mean? A way to help people is a gift from the gods, the earths, or whatever, the universe, however you want to put it. But that's what this happened. So within us, we still carry that DNA. That's why you do what you do. That's why I do what I do. It just happens to be who we are. And if you allow kids, like I said, from a young age to follow that instincts, great things will come out of it, versus trying to re-educate them and program them and put them, through a school system that just doesn't really teach them how to think or be who they are, but try to make them fit in this type of society box to benefit the system only, at our expense. Then this is what we're going to have. We're going to have this chaos. We're going to have this ugliness. We're going to have this, this viciousness towards each other. We're not going to be the people that we really are supposed to be. You understand? I don't know if that makes sense. And I hope
No, I understand. I didn't know too much about like DNA memory until a few years ago. I think there was a like scientific study in a zoo, which was a really good example of I think it was like chickens or something like that were born in a zoo. They've never been out of the zoo before, so they have no contact with any other animal. But on the roof of their like enclosure was like a screen. So like their roof was like an artificial roof. So like it would show like daylight, so it would mimic like what outside is, because they're actually inside. And as part of a study, what they did was fly over certain animals on this virtual screen. It'd be like a sunny day, and then they would fly over, like, for example, an eagle. Now, bear in mind, these chickens have never seen an eagle. They've never came in contact with an eagle before. And because they're the children, even though the chickens are like kid chickens, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they went ballistic. They were fearful for their lives because
they knew it was a predator.
They know it's a predator, and somebody else. After I read that, somebody else made a comparison of why we're always scared of like monsters in the closet in the dark. From our DNA memory of hundreds of thousands of years ago, it's of cats. We're scared of cats, like tigers, leopards, jaguars, and them sorts. And you don't realize this when you're a kid, obviously, and then when you get older and research into things and see studies and anthropology and things like that, it really gets broken down to you, and it is very fascinating. But as I say, a few years ago, I didn't have a clue about any of this stuff. But
no, it is. Even when you get deja vu feelings, even when you know how many people say, "Oh, I got visited by," the kids tell their mothers, "Hey, I had a dream," or such and such woman came in my mind, and it'd be like their grandmother that they never met, or somebody else, and the mother would be like, "Hey, that's that's somebody in our family." That's all has to do with your DNA memory. You know what I'm saying? And we pass down to our children what skills we develop in our lifetime. So if you think about it, how many kids become cops because their family were cops? How many people become military because their family's military? How many people become singers because their family was singers? It is some, or play the trumpet, play the piano. Like Prince, like Prince's father was, a musician, and his mother, I think, was an entertainer. Richard Pryor, you could go down these lines and end up realizing that none of this is all a DNA passed down. So that's basically my stories. My mother was, coming out the Caribbean, we're already artistic, but also military. My whole family's been military, like I said, from the militias all the way through. I mean, my grandfather was in charge of the military when they brought in Trujillo, which was the dictator that the United States put in there. And then under Balaguer, we ran the military. My uncle, his son, my mother's brother, was the top general. We ran the military all the way through those process. And then to this day, my whole cousins and all of them are all military. The whole, so the Morillo, actually, when you mentioned Morillo in the Dominican Republic, we actually have this prestige, elite. The name carries that, you understand?
Yeah,
but that's why I carry myself as well. Again, it's a DNA thing. That's probably why I was always in the fights and gangs and stuff like that, because that's also in my bloodline. But also I carry myself in a classy way, in a dignified way. Again, it falls under that, as my family tree was such a, prestige family that they didn't play that mess. You had to carry yourself. And then again, growing up in this culture and the way we wanted to be, and probably why I was attracted to it, you understand? And probably why I'm not attracted to the mainstream today is because, it's not who I really am. But yeah, I'm still attracted to the underground. You got underground rappers still going at it, incredible. with the same intensity, and they really disrespectful, but they got a brotherly thing, a sisterly thing. The breakdancers, look at them. They got their whole community is beautiful. It's a love community. You know what I'm saying? They battle, and then it's going on to Red Bull. Now it's going to the Olympics. You know what I'm saying? It's just going. Once the formula is right, that's what will happen. It will bring the greatness out of us. That's who we are. So this hip hop, the original hip hop culture, is designed that way to bring our greatness out. But then the industry and them saw it as a problem because it gave us too much power, too much unity, and destroyed it and mainstream pumps this garbage out, daily in order to do the opposite. You understand? So I'm trying to work hard with charities and different kids to give them the power that we once developed in its purest form. You know what I mean? Not this corrupt garbage. And I was in the street in the 90s, so I know how they did it. They screen out they tell you what they want you to put out. If not, they shelved your songs, in that era. So if you wasn't pumping out the vocal stuff or this and that, or let's say like with Biggie, look how many times Biggie's mother says he wasn't like that. He wasn't in the streets like that. You know what I mean? Yeah, of course, everybody is in the streets in your neighborhood. There's dealers everywhere, but he wasn't really about that life. But Puffy and those guys, that's what they wanted him to push. And even in his records, he's talking about, down to raping children. You know what I mean? Come on, that's not who we are. That's not who he was. But the industry, that's the industry. So they destroy somebody that's such a good artist, like let's say Biggie. 50 Cent, so a totally different story. But say Biggie, you get a real pure-hearted soul, good person. That's why he had a lot of love in Brooklyn and really talented. But then the industry corrupted him. Imagine if the industry wasn't involved with him. He would have been, who knows what he would have been doing, probably more Juicy and those type of songs. You understand? So
100%. Like I always, well, not always, but like recently that there's a new documentary on Netflix of like Biggie. I think it's The Story I Wanted to Tell or something like that. And it's like they have the camcorder from back in the days and they're following him around, and it's like the behind the scenes of the time. And you just look at that era and you think, like, imagine if Tupac and Biggie were still here today. Like, you see the Jay-Z's of billionaires. Exactly, yeah.
The industry destroyed them. Sorry, go ahead.
It was people getting in between, 100%. I agree. But like you see, like your Dr. Dre and Jay-Z, who are billionaires now, and you just think of the weight and the power that them two had would have been miles ahead. With no disrespect to Dr. Dre and Jay-Z.
But can I jump in on that? So if you study both of them, and I remember I come up with this, Dr. Dre and them, remember they coming out of California. When they came out with NWA, New York rappers, we had the Rakims in them. We had more of a we was at a more of a lyricist, poetry, knowledge thing. NWA came and crushed all that and brought in that whole gang culture, negative, disrespectful, even down to niggas with attitude, being their title. It was strange. I didn't listen to them in the beginning. I thought they were terrible. I thought they were whack. And we also knew that was like, to us, I'm not saying that they are, but they had the elements of being a CIA type of thing. You understand? Like, it was done really to destroy our culture. I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that to us on the street, the people that had knowledge, and we stood away from that because we saw it as it was a counter. And that's why you got like Tim Dog from Ultramagnetic did F. Compton. You had people attacking NWA, not because they hated them. It was because it wasn't what we perceived as hip hop. It was some that was, and then they were everywhere. They had main distribution. So it was like, here we have these great artists that we grew up with that paid their dues and that only did good for us. Rakim used to say, he wouldn't say a curse in his rhymes. He used to say that if you have to say a curse in your rhymes, it's because you didn't have enough vocabulary in your head to choose a better words to express this. So you see what I'm saying? That's the mentality. Listen to the Rakim records. You don't hear that. And his thing's classic. And then his real life is like, like he's talking about real life with the struggle of not having lit in his pockets and having to go and cut another plate with Eric B, which is a record, to eat, plate to eat, the metaphors. So he has to cut a record in order to try to drop some so he can, actually eat. You understand? So this is real. That's real life. That's how we got to do. I got to cut a painting, right, to eat. You see what I'm saying? But not talking about, I'm going to shoot this person in the head. I'm going to do this. I'm going to pimp this. I'm going to pimp. That's the stuff that became destructive. So getting into the 50 and those people and the Jay-Z. So Jay-Z, as you know, so first of all, I'll touch on those real quick just to give your viewers a history. 50 Cent is not the real 50 Cent. There was a street kid called 50 Cent out of Brooklyn, and he was like, no joke on the street. He was a stick-up kid that was robbing drug dealers. He was infamous on the street. He was small. He used to go to Albee Square Mall, and he was legend on the street. Legend. And he ended up getting murdered. But he used to, like, he stuck up LL Cool J. He was sticking up the earlier rappers too. So he had a name. That's the real 50 Cent, right? So they took that name and applied it to this rapper off of this street legacy, right? Jay-Z is not the real Jay-Z. Jay-Z comes from jazz. Jazz was this, and you can look up his records. Jazz is this real hardcore, well-respected MC out of Brooklyn who opened up the doors and had Jay-Z as his little man. And you get Nas dissed him on that, remember? And if you listen to Ether, Nas hits him in the head with that. You know, that's where his name, Sean Carter. Where does Jay-Z come from? It comes from Jazz saying, I'm the J to the Z in one of his songs. Jazz had like maybe 2 or 3 albums, and one of them was Walking, I think it was like Walking with a Panther. He had a panther with him. You know, that's the consciousness. He had a panther with him coming out of the train. And I think LL Cool J kind of like did that in one of his albums where he named it Walking with a Panther. But it was Jazz that was laying down those foundations, and he had the street cred, not Jay-Z. Jay-Z ended up getting it once he entered the music business and all that other stuff, and they molded him. So do your homework. When you do your homework, you'll see what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't know that. Because
So
the one that I did find out is Rick Ross.
Rick Ross, another one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Perfect.
that story. Yeah. But I didn't know about 50 Cent and Jay-Z. 50 Cent seems a bit more like using the legacy. I don't know. The Jay-Z one to me sounds like a bit more like paying homage and inspiration. That's how I take it.
He didn't. He did. It could have been earlier on like that, but no, they ended up having conflict over it because he did blow up on it, and he did put Jazz on a song early, like in one of his earlier albums, and then they had a major fallout because of all that as well. So coming from New York, we kind of like know all these secrets. But also with Rick Ross, another one. You know, people don't know who Rick Ross was. You know, big crack dealer, drug dealer dude. You know, same way with Death Row. You know, Death Row was started with Freeway, what's his name? Freeway, I forgot the full name. But anyway, that's who started with Suge Knight. But then you could kind of like, not to be in conspiracy theories, but you could kind of like see how the system began to choose these different types of artists to push their agenda of that negativity and just
I think it's also human behavior. Like when you see how the news has shifted in recent years, it's like it's this clickbait culture, and people don't like to see nice things. It's as simple as that. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of people want to see things that fear them or piss them off. Do you know what I mean? I think that also plays into human instinct. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that plays into human instinct of like when something's nice, we don't really take any attention of it. It's nice, but if something is there that could cause a possible threat, that's the one that piques your attention. That gets the alarm bells ringing, and I think that's maybe, I don't know if I'm being too naive or
no, everybody. No. We see it as we see it, and it's all good because we all need these different perspectives because that's what it's about. Understanding. Nobody has the real solution, the answer to anything. So it's good to hear this stuff. But like I said, coming up from the streets and knowing certain people's, like with 50 Cent, for instance, you go into Supreme Team, and that big family drug gang that was involved with a lot of stuff, and them being in jail after, a lot of 50 Cent's record on the Holy Quran, where people say it basically ratted on them on records, and then Supreme being locked up. But these are street dudes we grew up with that had credibility on the streets, whether it was drugs or whether they were kingpin, and they were the early ones in the industry. So they were funding the independent labels. Remember, labels wasn't really signing people. The first, I think, artist group to be signed, which was a friend of mine, Tito, Fearless 4, they were signed to a major. They were probably like the first. Even Rakim and them came out of independent small labels, and they had to get distribution. But all that was done locally, just like early hip hop. We had it, the earlier radio stations. Radios didn't play hip hop, like underground hip hop. That was being done. That was being done through AM radios and home. People having radio stations in their homes and transmitting, and then we knew what stations to go to and record the tapes. And Zulu Nation had Zulu beats, so it was only like certain avenues where you get it. Then later on, you can see how it starts to get taken over, and then they start choosing what they're gonna play, what they're not gonna play. You understand? So not to say that it's all conspiracy. No, it's like you said, some of it is just the evolution and the direction it goes because the way the world is at the moment. You know what I'm saying? So absolutely, I agree with you on that too.
Another sort of group that I want to touch on is IBM.
Yes.
So, for anybody who doesn't know, IBM is the Incredible Bombing Masters. I don't think you could get away with that name in New York today, given post 9/11 and things. But back in your day, when you were part of them, what were you doing?
So IBM is incredible, man. It's definitely what created the graffiti legacy, not just for myself, but my whole little crew. IBM, Incredible Bombing Masters, just so people to know, bombing is the slang word we would use for tagging up things. And so when you went out tagging, we would do it as groups. We'll get on so before you even do it outside of a train, because you had to go into these areas. So you wasn't just able to walk into these areas and do a mural on a train. That's what makes us so incredible, is the fact that you actually have to go in these areas and, again, develop that respect and have to fight and have to, do a lot of shit in order to have the privilege to write on these trains. But you started off as bombing, and they used to say writing prior to us. They didn't call it, we wasn't called graffiti artists, we was called writers. Graffiti kind of like was the mainstream, just like breakdancing. It was beat boy, beat girl, and then breakdance is more with the media, and then it stuck as it evolved. But the original slang. So bombing meant you bombed, like you tagged up on everything. So you hit something up and you see your name, you'd be like, yo, I bombed that shit, right? You tell your friends like, yo, you see my tag, I bombed that. So, you bomb your school, you bomb it. So again, that's the genius of hip hop, in which you could do, like, in your mind, like an act of like you bomb something, but never even bomb it. You're doing it with art. You understand? But just getting up, the system is so angry that you did that you're getting away with, like, you bombed something. You bombed their building. You bombed their subway. So that's where that comes from. And the legacy of IBM was incredible because it was from the generations before us, right before us. It was Doze Green, who's famous now, Doze. He's a famous fine artist as well. And Ken Swift, a Rocksteady crew. So both of them are from my area. Everybody thinks they're from the Bronx, but they're actually from lower part of Harlem, a few blocks, actually a couple of blocks away from me, on 97th Street, which became Rocksteady Park, because Crazy Legs came to my neighborhood and we already had a full culture running around. That's where that character comes from. That's the Mad Muggsy. So originally, before Rocksteady, it was Young City Boys, and they had a couple other names. That's Ken Swift, Frosty Freeze, a whole bunch of them. They from my neighborhood. They already had a whole. And then they had a crew of little guys like Ken Swift, and I went to school with all of them. And so you had little Lucan. It was a lot of kids, Lucan, Alfies, and all them. And Dino, rest in peace. They would do this little Muggsy thing, with their drawing, all that stuff. So Doze began to draw them, but that all came out of IBM. So him and Ken Swift, remember, we all kids. So we create this stuff at 12, 13, you empower the imagination. IBM, Incredible Bombing Masters. And we would take a lot of the other, like, corporations, like CIA was Criminals in Action. That was a graffiti crew. So a lot of the stuff that was mainstream already, we would snatch, again, like the N-word, we snatch it and then define it. So IBM actually had all the elites prior to us. It had Lady Pink was a member, Mayor was a member, Kel, Doze, all the people that would be known as Rocksteady from this area. Mad Muggsy Nation was a part of it. Frosty Freeze, who's now Pop Master Fable, who's a legend, a pioneer, but he used to write Pacer. He was a part of that. So that was the generation older than us. So we, like, let's say we was 12, 13. Yeah, about 12, I think, when we got IBM, 12, 13. We was in middle school. They were already maybe 15, 16, 17. So what happened was, as Rocksteady started to develop in my neighborhood with Crazy Legs, because it was already in the Bronx with JoJo and them. Crazy Legs came down to do a chapter. So Rocksteady was already famous in the Bronx with Zulu Nation. They were the top crew. But in my neighborhood, we had our little, our movement. So when Crazy Legs, Frosty Freeze brought Crazy Legs to my neighborhood, he got to see something spectacular that he was just like, so he went back and was like, yo, I want to start a Manhattan chapter. So, but he basically, it changed, history changed. It became to be like, it's just Rocksteady. None of that, a lot of that got lost in the story because of the crack and stuff like that came soon to follow. But IBM, so what happened was, I meet Poke. He comes from another territory, 100th Street, from a project into my neighborhood. My middle school, my junior high school, Joan of Arc, ran from So you'd be like 12, 13 years old and ran to the first grade of high school. So then you had these kids that were almost adults, some of them getting left back. So you almost have full grown men and women in the school with you. So it was crazy. It was almost like going into a prison. It wasn't like school is today. Like it was smoking in the hallways. It was graffiti shit. It was gangs. And, you know, it was like going to prison. Like you actually, you know, you fought almost every day. You got tested until your level, until you got tested to the point where you passed. And then people kind of left you alone and you had your crew. So the artists got to, you know, would stick with the artists, and we was all wild. We was crazy. Like we was violent. We was crazy. We was, you know, cutting class, doing all the stuff, robbing people. We stick up kids. We rob, you know, to eat. We rob, you know, we put people in yoke, move, you know, rob them and stuff like that. Go through their pockets. So we had gotten together. Koch, because he was up there, and I was from another territory. Koch was able to bring. He was being schooled by a lot of the older kids up there. His sister was like dating like Doze and some of the other members back then. So they would take Koch in as a little brother. So like the famous Kippy D was a dancer, gave Koch his name. So little by little, they were always giving Koch something, you know, because he was in that mix and he was like the little brother, little guy. And they always looked out for the little guys, right? So Koch was given, first it was MOS, Masters of Style. And I was already with him running. We was like his little, we already had like a little clique in the school, but we was catching, we was bombing shit. And they were going on to the breakdancing, which was now becoming famous. Like it was starting to get attention from the books and starting the early films like Wild Style and Style Wars was now focusing a lot on the breakdances. So like Doze went on to that. As Doze went on to that, we had MOS from Kippy. We already put in work with that. Doze ends up passing down IBM to Koch. So then automatically a bunch of us from MOS was the new founding crew of IBM. So then we end up taking over the one line with it. It's just like putting a battery in our back. You tell these kids, yo, this is your crew. It's like, what? Now we gotta go. So I used to write Sender. And then when it came to that, it was like, we had to now mature. So it was like, we had to take this serious. We wasn't doing the outside of trains. We was bombing inside of the trains, riding it to the last stop and catching tags. It's called motion tagging. And so you just evolved. Once we got the crew, it was like, we didn't do throw-ups. We didn't believe in those bubble letter stuff. That was, to us, was a waste of paint. Remember, we had to steal paint. It was scarce. So, and then we were around people like this. So we went from tagging to trying to piece. The piece is short for masterpiece. Then those are the burners, the full colors. So we basically skipped throw-ups. That's what made us really kind of like well known, is that very early we had technical graffiti skills, because this crew was passed down by legends and pioneers that was masters at this style of lettering, because every crew has a style of lettering. So then that's how that happened with us. And then we end up fighting for 145th, which is an underground layup uptown, and getting control of it with other crews. And next thing you know, we dominated the #1 line, which is, you can't go no higher than the one line. It runs from the Bronx all the way through Broadway, all the way downtown to, you know, Lower Manhattan to South Street Seaport. So this is the main line for exposure. You know, you're going through Times Square, you're going through everywhere that's really important for, you know, other people, the outside people, versus the other lines would be more secluded in those neighborhoods, let's say Brooklyn, and people might have never seen those pieces. You understand? Unless the trains got, taken out and put it into another line, then some artists would get fame. We was able to have the #1 line, which was the most famous line. So we earned our legacy, and we just evolved that from their skills. We just went crazy, and that's what that story comes from, you know.
Yeah, that's nuts. That isn't what I was expecting, to be fair, but it is a crazy story. No worries. I enjoyed that story. That is yeah, I thought it was going to be like an initiation process or something, but it was very much like a handed down from generations and sort of that sort of side of things. Can
I just say something on that? So not to cut you off, sorry. So what happens is we master the art of lettering, which again is a rebellious type of, because you could, in this art form, is like, you're trying to put your name up because you think you're not going to exist tomorrow. So you're trying to like let the world know you was here, right? So that's why we used to call them forever tags, where you climb places where it's hard to reach. You know, it's really important to leave that stamp. But so we are the art of letterings, but every crew, and that's what the world's lost today. They got in street art, and a lot of graffiti writers. But what we had was that every area and every crew had like a style that you build up on. And that's how you can also identify who's from where and who's from who. So we have our own style. Our style comes out of TC5, the Crazy Five, IBM. And then later on, FC came in, which is West, and those guys from PNB Clothing and Supreme and stuff like that. They also, so we have a, that's what connects us, is that we follow a trait of a style and lettering. So you could identify kind of like our letterings versus, let's say, a crew from Brooklyn or something. And then you understand? So that's, so IBM,
personality.
Yeah, IBM has its own style, but it's also with other crews and also have that same style because they're all connected. You understand? It's like a tree with a branch, but they all distinct in a way. You know what I mean? But
so you can trace it back to areas and gangs.
Yeah.
And crews.
Yeah.
What so you mentioned there before that your friend got, like, his nickname was given to him. So was Sen-1 given to you, or how did that name come about?
So remember, so I'm 12 years old, right? And we in school, in middle school, we boom. That first year, it was just like, because back then it was different. Life was slower, very slow. Like a day lasted. It wasn't like this fast pace like we live today. We was poor. We was in the ghettos. You know what I mean? Nothing, you know. So one day would be like what is today's like 2-3 days. You know what I mean? A month was like, you know, 2 or 3 months. You know, a year was like, whoo, forever. A summer lasted forever. You know, a winter lasted forever. So everything was really slower. You know what I mean? Because we wasn't caught up in the way the system is. You understand? So you spend a lot of time in the streets. So so one thing that's beautiful about hip hop back then was that because it was developed by young people, we had the power of the imagination, and hip hop completely takes from everything because we were surviving. So that's why like DJing, it all had to do with break beats from records that was already there instead of having a band playing instruments. You know, the same thing with MC and rapping. It comes up from the earlier poet, like last poets, and it can continue to go on. You could find the traces of these things. Break dancing with bebop and all these acrobatic dancing, and even some African tribal dancing. So everything had its roots, and actually breakdancing got a lot out of the karate movies. Jackie Chan has a lot to do, and Bruce Lee and them, a big influence on the breakdancers. Because we, at 3 o'clock every Saturday, we only had a few channels on TV, so we pretty much all watched the same thing. You know what I'm trying to say? Like in the city, like you pretty much, if they had a night of one type of movie, everybody went home and watched that movie. So when you go outside, you can talk about the same thing. So every Saturday at 3 o'clock, they would have this marathon of karate movies, you know, like a couple hours. You know, I can't remember, but 42nd Street also had these double features of karate movies. Karate movies are big. So we, you know, cats will actually wear karate, the big round hats, the Vietnamese type hats. They'll wear the karate slippers. You know, people took those characters at that time. That was really important for us. I think we didn't really have identity so much that we gravitate towards characters. So Sender comes from, so the name comes from Sender. For me, comes from Sender, right? There's a lot of Sens now that came after me, you know, that they got to explain where they got their name from. But me, the way the Sen was developed, at that time, it didn't exist. And what happened was I was looking for a name to look cool in the class, but everything was pretty much taken at that time. And you couldn't, one of the rules in graffiti and hip hop was no biting. Like you could be influenced by somebody, or you could be taken in from an older person and they could give you like their name. Like, so there'll be Baby Legs, Baby Buck 4. There was always like a baby attached to it because that meant that they were grooming you. You know what I mean? That you would, and they also gave you your protection too on the streets. If you got to hold the cat to take you under his wing. And that happened like that with the drug trade and later on continued, but that's how that was. So I didn't really have that, you understand? But so what happened was a couple of us, Epic, who became Epic, we had to find names. We would go through dictionaries, you go through comic books, you would just go through stuff. But the name had to be cool, and it also had to be original, and it had to fit you. So that was really hard. So you see it, and like I said, you know, by my generation, like every word, every name was taken, you know what I mean? And that was a problem. You couldn't do that. You couldn't take somebody's name unless they passed it down to you or they knew whatever. It was rare that there was times that you had writers with the same name, and they were from different areas and maybe even different generations, but that was really rare. So anyway, Sender, I found in the comic book, I was reading some comic book, and you know how they bold certain words in the comic books? It'd be darker. And there was one that said sender. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, sender. And I was a skinny little kid. I used to get beat up a lot, fight. You know, I get bullied a little bit. You know, I was always had a temper. I would fight, but I would lose. You know, that developed later. Later on, I became a monster, you know, on the streets. But young, when I was at that age, it was, so sender made me feel like Superman, like the sender. So I had that for again, it seemed like a year, but it was probably just a few months. And then when the crews got handed down to us, especially IBM, and Poke was just like, yo, this is it. You know, you got to do this. You got to practice. He started going around telling people like what they had to do if they were going to be down. Like, it was like, you didn't just automatically get down. And then me and Epic came, and it was like, your name is too long and your name is too long. He had perhaps. I think he might have got it out of a comic book. And Poke only had 4 letters. So at that time, that was the thing. You had to be able to do stuff quickly and a lack of materials. So you couldn't have a 6-letter name. I mean, that's, first of all, that's just like doing 2 pieces, you know what I'm saying? So, and then they're also kind of corny as you're getting older. So we cut the name in the middle, right? And it was Sen and Der. I didn't look at the Sen part because you couldn't even pronounce it at that time. It didn't exist. So, and there was writers like Sin, Sun, Scene. There was 2 scenes at the time. So you had the famous scene in the Bronx, and then we had a TC5 scene from Harlem, right? So again, it played a part in which I couldn't copy. But because I was part of the legacy of Scene, TC5 scene with IBM, Pope, we looked at, it was a funny story because we cut it, and we looked at, and it was Der was the first thing, and it was like Der. And I remember we tried to write it out and do a little piece of it, and I was like, nah, I ain't feeling that shit, Der. It was like I was already getting picked on. It was like, Der? Nah, I can't do no Der. So then Poke was really the one that we looked at it, and we both said, like, we looked at that side, and Poke was the one that, like, I was like, yeah, you know, skeptical in a way. And it was Poke that kind of like was really much like, nah, Sen will be good for you, Sen. And I was like, yeah, but I liked it, but it reminded me too much of Scene and these other people, Sen and Sun. I didn't want to be considered a biter. And there were 3-letter words like this, just the middle letter was different. You know what I mean? On some of these cats. So I didn't want to fall in that category. But it was Pope that actually pushed the idea in my head. Nah, Sen. And he was like, yo, your predecessor of Scene and TC5 and those guys, the letter style is gonna fit perfect. And then so then it stuck. But then the crazy thing was, it wasn't an easy journey. Like whenever, and it wasn't a one really. We put one what we wanted to, because at that time we was all ones. So Poke, Epic, Sen. You didn't have to say Sen-1 at that time. Yeah, you did it just to like, you put it up in tags once in a while just to say you was one, but you didn't have to really do that. You was already known as the first. So anyway, it was hard because when I would be around other writers and we go somewhere and everybody says their names, right? Because writers knew writers. You looked at each other, you could see a spot paint on your sneaker. It would be like, yo, what you write? Because you had to know if you had beef with them or if you knew who they were. And also to check the credentials. Are you real? Are you not? So everybody checked each other. So whenever you met these crews and you'd be like, I'm Sen, they would be like, Sin? No, Sen. Sin? No, Sen. It was so hard for people to catch it at first that it was frustrating. But little by little, it just did. And it became, everybody would call me Sen in my neighborhood, you know, and it just became, you know, even Ken Swift and Rocksteady Cats would call me Sen. To this day, that's how they know me. I mean, I went through other aliases in life, but yeah, so that's
the main one.
Yeah, so that's how that name came to be. And then one just, like I said, stamps as being the first, you know.
That's awesome. That's like that's such a cool like origin story. Like superheroes have origin stories, and now you've now become a superhero with an origin story. You come full circle.
That's why I had to tell you that story, because a lot of kids today, even today, don't understand how much work we actually and how much belief we had in this. That you actually go home and practice and practice. You spend a lot of time before you even hit the streets. You just had to spend a lot of time practicing and thinking about things and going through investigating, even to find a name for yourself that fit. You had to like, and the crazy thing is, sorry, but check how DNA memory worked out. Sen-1 actually, if you put it all together, is Sinon in a Taino, in the Arawak word, it's like hurricane. So actually, if you have it all as one word, I actually how ironically, I inherited original name of my ancestry. So a friend of mine, actually, that's his nickname as a kid in the Dominican Republic, because he was born during a song. They call him Sen-1. So me and him, he'd be like, yo, I'm the original Sen-1. I mean, like, he's a breakdancer with Rocksteady. He's an electric boogie dude from back in the days, Orlando Rock. But yeah, that's his nickname all his life. So it's funny that how ironic how later on that name was actually meant for me. You know, it was meant, you know, traditionally. So it's crazy.
That is crazy, yeah. I want to sort of fast forward to a specific time, maybe like the late 80s, and a new mayor takes over New York. So Mayor, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Is it Koch?
Koch, yeah, Koch was.
Koch. Yeah. So at that time, because the reason I mentioned this is because as I was like researching for this podcast, I seen a wanted poster.
Yes.
That was from around that time, right?
I should have brought it in. I should have had it here. It's in the other room.
It is a real wanted poster, though, right? Like
yeah. You want me to bring it real quick, and then you edit?
No, it's fine. If I'm allowed, I could save it and then pop it on the screen here. So
yeah, absolutely. Anything you need from that. Yeah. So what happened was, again, we was local kids. I wasn't doing trains yet, but we was bombing everything, projects, buildings. It's like once you get into that, it was like it's an addiction. You got to see a name everywhere, and again, that gave you credibility in the streets. You know what I mean? If you're getting up, is attracting the other, you know, not just writers, but people in general. Like, because everybody wrote like on the walls, like these walls, like people, you know, if you dated somebody, you know, people wrote, people had hand skills just to have it. But it didn't mean that they were going to be graffiti writers. You understand? It was just something for kids to do. So everything was bombed out. So what you try to do is like make your name. And I end up in my area bombing like a lot of the projects. When I visit my friends, I would bomb everything. And I would make these mops, these homemade markers that went around here, a homemade marker out of deodorants. Like we would make our stuff. So you take deodorants or you take shoe polish stuff, you steal the school erasers and you make these mops. I was, you know, and those are where you got the drips from. And that got judged too. So all of that got judged, your techniques and what you used and how you used it. So I just became, in my area, really like known. So what happened was one of the projects, I guess, the authorities of the project, I don't think they had the police yet. They had I think the police patrolled it, but I don't know what they had. I can't remember if they had housing police. But anyway, what happened was they end up, and if you notice the flyer says Graffiti George, they specifically, so at that time it was like it is, your identity had to be hidden. Like you was a bomber, but you didn't want nobody, if you wasn't a part of this, you didn't really, or if you didn't grow up with me, you wouldn't know that I was Sen. You understand? Like it was kept hidden because we was vandals and we was also criminals. We was robbing people, we was stealing paint from stores. Like we was little criminals. So in a way that became your identity, but you didn't cross the two. Like George would be who your family knew and Sen would be who your crew and your street kind of like knew. You know what I mean? But the authorities didn't really know. So what happened was somehow somebody must have ratted me out and told them my real name, who I was. And they did this little wanted post and put them in all these projects. So projects are low income housing, government housing, right? And that's really where they run them down. So it's like real ghetto, you know what I mean? Piss everywhere, you know, it's like really messed up situation to be in the projects. Not all projects, obviously, but where we was growing up from, these places were really like the elevators wouldn't be working, that type of stuff. So anyway, they put up all these posters everywhere. And at the time, you know, we young, we're not thinking this is like historical. We looking at it like, yo, that's messed up. We went and ripped them all down. We made it like the whole crew, like, yo, let's go around. We went to every single project that day, ripped up all these posters and threw them away. Lucky that I kept one. And remember, we outlaws. So you're not trying to keep evidence. You know, it's lucky that survived. A lot of things got destroyed back then because you was really living that life. You wasn't trying to but that wanted poster stood on my wall and everybody used to, you know, some people wrote on it. And it just, I don't know, it survived time. It was actually, you could see the creases of where I had it in my pocket all day. We folded it, I had it in my pocket, ran around. But it wasn't something we bragged about back then. It was something that, like I said, if you came to my house, in my room, you would see it on my door. It was like, you know, kid shit, like, yeah, I got a wanted poster. But then later on, it's funny because then on Instagram, this guy contacted me and he took a picture. There's a metal plate one in Brooklyn, still to this day, that has Graffiti George and Georgina. So it actually became like a template for housing projects in certain projects to just characterize a graffiti vandal. So who knew? Who knew that was going to be historical? You know what I mean? But that's definitely going to go in a museum one day. Definitely. I keep that under wraps. I don't really, yeah, I keep.
Yeah. We'll keep it under wraps. But no, I've seen it and I
No,
was like,
I
whoa,
don't
that's
care.
cool.
Now it's cool, but crazy with the flyer when you read it, how innocent the system was. What it said, it was reward cleaner buildings. Like there was not no real like reward. We're gonna this much money, get them, catch them, put them in jail. It was more like like it was still innocent, the system. You know what I mean? But then Koch, getting back into what you're saying. So I think in Star Wars, you see that documentary where it covers both sides, the government side and the graffiti writer side. Koch came in and he was like the gentrification type of mayor and really racist, right? Terrible dude, really terrible. And he was only caring about one community, his community. And us, we was like, so he outlawed graffiti. Graffiti for him, and he says in that documentary, that's why I mention it. He says that graffiti is public enemy number one. It's the first signal that society has lost control. You know what I mean? So that was his main mission. So Koch, he's the one that caused a lot of the gang, he evolved graffiti to be as violent as it started becoming. Because prior to that, like my brother's generation, which was more of a hippies generation, they would go to open train yards, like you see in some of the books, and Tracy and those guys and the earlier scenes and all those dudes, they would be able to go to these massive open train yards that were not underground. They were out, and there'll be hundreds and hundreds of trains, and it'll be humongous. So you could be in there with a graffiti crew, the generation before us, and not even run into each other. And you could be there all day hanging out like a park. It's just open, like park trains. Koch shut all that down, and he introduced triple fences. He introduced the barbed wire fences. It went from regular barbed wire fence to the razor wires. Like he really hated us. He actually put, in that documentary, he talks about it, he actually put dogs in there. And then we found out that a dog got electrocuted. So that was one of the reasons they stopped doing dogs. But he had dogs actually. Wow. And remember, we kids, he's actually trying to use lethal tech, using lethal tactics to discourage us from riding on trains. And then, so he did a whole system. Then he created, which is the first hip hop police, which is what's it called? Well, those two cops called Starsky and Hutch. And then there was a name for it. I can't remember right now, but it was a specific task force to go against graffiti writers. So then you get the Michael Stewarts, and a bunch of graffiti writers got murdered by the police, got beaten to death. He started implementing these tactics that were really against us. So then what happened was, when he shut down the yards, now what happened was, when I mentioned the layup, we had to go uptown, underground. So these are smaller little yards that they have underground. So they park a few tracks of trains. And that's what made us all have to fight for those type of layups to control them, because there wasn't that many. Each line maybe had one or two, and had one big one and a bunch of little ones. So that put us into conflict with each other in territory for space, just to do this art. So he changed the whole thing up. But and he also implemented, because my generation was now doing masterpieces, and the community was starting to like it. People were starting to like it. Newspapers are taking pictures of these masterpieces. Dondi and these guys and Lee are doing these incredible murals on the trains, which are now in all the books, right? And then you get all these photographers taking these pictures, and people coming from around the world to see this. Graffiti was now becoming real popular in the world, and being looked at differently versus an all bombed out train, looking ugly. So what Koch did, he developed a system which was acid wash the trains. So they would go through like a car wash, but it was spraying this acid on it. But it didn't clean the trains. What it did was melt. He really wanted to destroy the art, so that it discouraged us. So every week they would get an acid wash, so your art wouldn't run for a long time. That's why it's rare to find a lot of the pictures of my generation, because they were constantly being, but again, they wasn't being completely washed off. So what it did was, he gave the society the impression of how ugly this was. So he did these commercials with different athletes and what was it called? It was like, he had a whole campaign against graffiti, and even Macho Camacho boxers and actors, all, they recruited them to talk about how whack graffiti was and how terrible it was. So we was like the full war against us. They had raid trains that would fly into the tunnels that were all metal, no windows. and the doors would be open, it would just be full of cops, and they'll jump out with sticks, chase you in the tunnels. Like, that was crazy. I could tell you a million stories about this shit. It was wild. I mean, they'll run the trains like to run over you. Like, they'll come flying in, and the doors open, they're just jumping out like stormtroopers, and we scatter like roaches when you turn on the light. You know what I mean? And so it was, my generation was a little, we caught the blunt of that, you know. But yeah, he really hated us. So
Wow, that is wild. That is wild. I sort of want to transition from being like an outlaw and sort of like a rebel in this graffiti style to how you got into like fine art and private commissions and things like that, because they seem like polar opposites. Like, and I know there was like a time that you sort of took off in between, and sort of, I imagine that is where this sort of transition happened. But how does one go from being on a wanted poster to being in private galleries?
oh man, to be honest with you, it was the universe. It was just destiny. It was who I was supposed to be. I went off into, again, society changed. There was a point when in hip hop that none of this mattered. Like, it was just the rap industry, like the graffiti, as you know, when you was growing up, it wasn't anything. There was like little traces of it in books, maybe in some films, B Street and stuff like that. So the breakdancing as well, everything kind of like fell back, fell down. It felt like almost disappeared. It was like these new generations resurrected, but it was like the rap industry that really dominated for a long time. And I got involved in that. It was all natural progression. I went from the graffiti crews into a real gang, which, you know, I'm branded there. I don't know if you can see it, but that's my outlaw patch. That's the Westside Familia. And I became known on the streets for that, for my work in that. I also went into the music business. I went into raising a family while I was in the streets, catching cases, went to trial on drug conspiracy check cases with the feds, and won. I've been in, you know, a bunch of shit. So my life was crazy. But then what happened was raising a family as well. My brother, he's a fine artist, Ricky Majika. He's actually one of the top classical illustrators, realism, and really famous. And his wife, this is like about 2009. His wife is a top designer, Heather Harlan, and she had worked on Diane Van Fugensberg's lines and all these other famous people, and she blew them up. So she got taken in by Rachel Roy, which was the top designer here, for a new line that she was going to do in Macy's. And Heather was recruited as the top designer for her, because, you know, these people are just the name and they have everybody else under them doing the work, right? So anyway, she had this idea of some kind of graffiti stuff, but she didn't really understand, because she's seen all my stuff and she knew, you know, she's family. Anyway, long story short, I was going through a transition in my family, you know, my life. My mom's and was passing away, had passed away. My divorce was, you know, my marriage is, you know, going down. Everything was like a real transition. That's why I say it was like the universe. So what happens is she asked me one day to, because she knew the graffiti history, was to give us some like info on graffiti, and I gave her some graffiti books and stuff. And then she came back and said, you know, well, I kind of like was thinking more of your black books, your graffiti black books, which are, you know, our sketch books that we have from back in the days. So I gave her, like, innocently, I gave her like 3 or 4, right? And then all of a sudden, like, I'm about to get laid off. I'm on a scheduled block to get fired from my job. Not fired, they were, you know, cutting down employees. So I was on that chopping block. I only had like a month left, right? And then all of a sudden, my mom's had just passed, and it was just a lot of things. And then all of a sudden, I get a call at work. She's at a meeting with Rachel Roy, and they put me on a conference call, and it's like, we got somebody who wants to talk to you. Boom, it's Rachel Roy, and it's like, oh, I love your work. Boom, boom. Want to do a collaboration? Are you interested? It was like, hell yeah, you know. So I ended up having a meeting with them, and it went from them picking up like maybe six pages of my artwork from back in the days. It was just bombed out pages like that, like stuff that was bombed out, and they used them as a pattern to launch off that line. And then it grew to being the first, like, as they were going through and introducing it to Macy's, because this is early. Nobody was really, Graph wasn't really even mainstream like that yet. I mean, some people were, but not the way it is today. And the street art wasn't really like, you know, as dominant as it is today. So we're talking about 2009. So they took more of the bombed out stuff and they printed it, and it got such a good feedback prior to being released that we end up doing everything, like from, you know, flat shoes to heels to spandex. So we was like pretty much the first to do all of that stuff with blouses. I mean, they just went off, like they went off. And so then ends up being, that's what ended up kicking it off. Next thing you know, I wasn't even online and stuff. I was doing these other projects behind the scene of my own. And all of a sudden now I have to have you know, I think Instagram was just coming out, I think like about 2010, 11, something like that. But I had to have my, you know, the Facebooks, the Twitters, all that stuff contract wise. So it threw me out there. And then Macy's came back for the release and hired me to do the windows, which then my brother was just like, yo, that's incredible. You know how many artists are on wait? You know how many people like me, everybody, So it just kept rolling. I just kept seeing those opportunities and I work hard and everything they asked, you know, I did, you know, we did a lot of photo shoots and then I just continued. We did, but I stood independent. It was just like that just put me on the path to be like, yo, at this age, I got a whole new career, which was, again, how ironic that you said that. 1 minute, you know, we outlaws and we wanted, and our mothers are beating the crap out of us for doing graffiti and everybody's chasing you and you got beef with crews and gangs and you got the system after you got Koch after, the mayor hates you. And then all of a sudden, fast forward, you know, 25 years, 28 years or something, 20, you know, something like that. All of a sudden, Macy's windows and you sitting at dinners and you're being invited by Rachel Roy to go out and you go on these fashion events and your clothes and you're getting trailers for photo shoots and, you know, you're getting these checks and you're getting cars picking you up and taking you, you know, it's like, holy shit, like just it was crazy. But it also made me then realize that that had a destiny path. And that's probably why I had so much turmoil in between my life, is because I was never really on my path. You understand? Yeah, so now that's how I see my life, is that I have a mission in life that's beyond me and I just have to fulfill it. So and all my successes today have just me being who I am from who I was, pushing the culture and keeping my art form pure, keeping myself as pure as I can, and just riding the wave. The universe opens up everything for me. You know, I don't fight for anything right now. Like everything just, I see it, it comes, I do it, move on, and it's just a beautiful thing, you know?
100%. So we were speaking before, like recording and things, of how much like momentum and how much like riding the wave is so important, because opportunities arise, like the Macy's one for yourself. And I'm imagining after, on the back of that, because it was probably a big deal, that you got way more offers off the back of that as well, of to do like way more like pieces and artworks, and then it's just capitalizing on that momentum and keeping the ball rolling.
Well, can I say something? Because we talked about it earlier and we can mention it now, like a lot of stuff we can mention. So I always did, like, I always kept in mind, because I come out of community centers in the neighborhoods, you know, we, in that era, like we had, the system was pumping in money, like community centers, social workers, stuff like that, poverty programs. So I always had that spot for a local community center, which still exists today. So I began to teach. We did a mural for them because it was getting all graffiti. So they figured that if I did a mural with some friends, that nobody will bomb this, and which it did to this day, that nobody writes on their walls. Is because they, you know, because it was a respect thing, and also it was the original art form from the community, right? It wasn't just somebody coming in. So that led to me to always do charity work. And then charity work actually has been the biggest blessing, because like I said, it's taken me to Africa, it's taken me to different places. When I be in the UK, I work with MAP, music and art production in Leeds. They deal with kids that don't do well in school, and there's an alternative program. They use music and art. So in these places I do, and that's what really opens up a lot. So like I had the opportunity to do stuff like, I developed a curriculum called Arts on Kicks. And I started with like Converse type material kicks. Now we're doing everything. But I just did a basketball, female, young ladies, not a friend of mine is not-for-profit, which deals with young ladies in basketball. And again, like I said, in Africa and all that stuff. So what we do is that I could teach them the techniques of doing sneakers and stuff to open up the creativity, how easy it is. And we use spray paint and everything. But also as a way of economics, if somebody, if a kid needs, especially with the internet, is a way that they could also use their art to, if they need to make money, instead of going to the streets and selling drugs and doing stuff. So it was a great program. So I received a few grants with that, but then that led to me working with different organizations on that path. which then eventually led to the celebrity stuff you see where MTV hit me up and we did Rita Ora episode for MTV, Rita Ora. We did an event for the New York Nets with Fabulous, did Fabulous sneakers and worked with them. Did BAP, which was a big Korean, I believe, South Korean group, probably the biggest at the time. And we did a whole big segment. I did, I think it's Michael Brown had a reality show in London, the UK, did his thing with Swiss Ski Beats. Did Michelle Obama had a Easter Day foundation event with her foundation, which was Let's Move, which encouraged kids to exercise more, together with an organization in Harlem that Magic Johnson was behind, with the cultural Harlem. I'll be forgetting a lot of this stuff, sorry. But Dougie Fresh had his organization, was a part of it. There was HipHop for Public Health. It was a group body, and that led to me doing a Michelle Obama sneaker, and it getting to the White House to this big Easter event. So it was a lot of that stuff comes out of, people see the celebrity names, but the story behind it has to do with the charity work. And that's how it came to be. And that's why I'm proud of it. But at the same time, I think people lose the real message. It's not that I was making money off of it. It wasn't that we was trying to get fame. It was using people's popularities and their power within their non-for-profits or behind the scene projects to help kids and youth. So that's always my motivation. To this day, I work with this group called the Children's Village in Harlem, which takes teens out of Rikers Island as an alternative. And then they hired me, I do a whole class, and these are all like Bloods and Crips kids, you know, but it's an alternative to teach them how to create these type of sneakers. And again, the original principle of hip hop, be creative, and also you could create your economics. If you're not being greedy, if you're just trying to survive, you can actually use art, dance, music on a small scale to pay your bills, you know, and live and eat if you have to, you know what I'm saying? So
100%. Like the names you reeled off there, obviously, are the ones that grab the headlines, and it is nice that them names are attached to charities as well, because then it sheds light on them charities and them sort of causes. But sort of, I guess, rewinding a tiny bit to the Macy's thing, when you said in the contract you have to become on social media and sort of have an online presence, which pretty much, like, I think everybody does now. Do you know what I mean? It's pretty much the given thing that you have to have an Instagram page, or you have to have a Facebook, or you have to have some sort of platform where you can sort of show your life and your work and things. And a question that I've asked, like, I've had a few artists on so far, and a question that I've asked all of them is basically there's an artist in the States called Tom White. I think he's in like galleries and things as well. He's also the guy who is the artist behind SpongeBob, you know, SpongeBob SquarePants. Yeah. But he's went on to do like fine art in galleries and things. And recently he did an interview where he said because of the pandemic, because of COVID, a lot of people have sort of, they can't go to galleries. They can't go to like actual art galleries and look at art and get commissions through galleries. Because I think, I'm not too clued up on the art world, but the way he was explaining it is that if somebody wants a private commission, they go through the gallery to get to the artist. And it's the gallery that actually has like contact with the artist to do these private commissions. But he said that through the pandemic, and obviously these galleries are closed and them connections are sort of like lost because people don't go to the galleries, a lot of his commissions are now coming directly through social media. Like somebody will just Instagram DM him and be like, can you do this for us, sort of thing, and as a commission, and to obviously like quite a big scale as well. How do you think, because the people that I've had on the podcast so far being artists don't have their paintings in galleries like yourself, so your perspective on this would be very, very interesting. Like the way that he phrased it was, galleries might be a thing of the past because now Instagram is like the platform. Like Instagram's the new social media gallery is the sort of phrase he would use. So I would like your thoughts, since you have like your artwork in these private galleries, what your thoughts are on that sort of social media galleries.
I guess it's what galleries. Me is the opposite, actually. Actually, being in Gallery d'Orsay in Boston, and they just celebrated their 20th anniversary, and their clientele, they never had street art, graffiti, or anything like that. They deal with all originals, Picasso's, Matisse's, and all those. So that's a whole different class of people. So their operation is different. their consumers, their clients, I should say. Those are big collectors. These are like stock options to them. You know what I mean? They don't just look at art because it looks good. They look at them as investments. So, and they operate as that. They don't operate as you go in a gallery, you know, it's specifically like they're brokers. They got brokers in there. They have their clients like selling stocks. I happen to walk in there and they happen to see, which is this piece on my website, which is a puzzle piece. You can't really see it, it's wrapped. But I had to distinguish my style from other people that was doing the abstract graffiti. Remember, I was doing it since 2009. It wasn't really welcomed by the graffiti community, you know what I mean? But then once it began to be lucrative, you start to see a lot of the graffiti artists knowing that to get into galleries and stuff. And it wasn't me that actually invented this stuff. There was like people like Futura, John 1, they were doing this when we was kids on trains and walls, like pushing the envelope. Basquiat, for instance, who was friends with my brother and stuff. You know, they obviously took it to a different level, but the mostly graffiti writers stood within that graffiti mind state. I was able, because of the Rachel Roy and the Macy's and all the other stuff I was doing, I began to develop what I knew would be marketable, you know what I mean? But also because of my story, not everybody been through what I've been through, even on the street scale. You know, I'm considered to be like exceptional that I'm here from all that. I mean, I'm cut from, a million times I could have been, done, you know what I'm saying? So, and people know this on the street that know me. So it's always the story behind the artist, but get into what you're saying. It depends the galleries. I've actually been the opposite. I was getting commissions on lines, but I really don't. It's been really the gallery, and especially this last show. They've been doing things virtual, but again, they do, small, like a client, bring clients into their gallery space, one-on-ones or two-on-twos, whatever it is. They got really big space. But again, it exposed me to this whole high level of collectors. So they actually put me in a place where I'm an investment now. I'm like a young stock where they telling people, his messages, his life experience, the way, he deals with gentrification, his experience, puts that, and I put my soul in the artwork, that I've been able to bring something to them, so they have their market, but I've been able to bring a younger, new collectors into the mix, which is new money, and younger people that now starting to realize art is an investment. You know what I mean? It's not just collecting. So you're getting a lot of people, even in the graffiti and the hip hop world, you're getting people now collecting the old flyers, and the museums now popping up everywhere. Original artists work, stuff that people would have paid a couple $100, a few years ago for an artist, famous graffiti artist. Now people are buying and collecting them. Those things are worth a lot of money. So everything, I'm catching a wave in which, and that was my goal though, was actually to take this art form always higher and higher in respect, because we put in so much work in it and we lost so many and we lost so much, that I feel my responsibility is to represent those that can't represent, and the message that we originally wanted with that passion. So yeah, it drains me when I do an art piece. It's not just an art piece to me, it's my soul, and they know it, and they felt it when the moment they see me, which then allowed me to be next to the Picassos. And it's like right now we have a show, their show, which is so successful, it's blessed, and is in the gallery, in their space, and it's called Urban Conversation. And it's based on one of my pieces, which had to do with that this conversation is going on all the time on the walls. People walk by and don't realize that every word, every message is a conversation. Street signs is a conversation. They tell you don't park here. You know what I mean? That's a conversation. Writers, we see things on the wall, it might be, somebody wrote something to me, and now I'm going to come back and cross it out and write a message to them. There's conversations going on that go back beyond words, that is visual, and it's not for everybody. You understand? So breaking that down and bringing that piece into them sparked what Matisse and Picasso and them was doing in Paris, in their days. They were using their art form as a conversation of what was going on. So we was able to connect what hip hop is and what my style and graffiti and stuff was to our generation, to what it was to those generations, and how important it was. So that led to a whole invention of mixing me with, and this culture and this style with stuff that never would have been mixed before, but it's based on that. So, but then getting back to what you say, they've been able to do really well with this show. They got a show running right now and it's been doing well, and they got people coming in. So I make very little actually online. More is made through. So it's opposite. So I just guess.
Opposite. Do you think that's because you're at the level now though? So like I think that there might be like a tipping point where online will probably, if you're small and relatively upcoming and not, you don't have like a reputation. I feel like nowadays it's probably easier to build that reputation online to the point where the galleries will start approaching you, and then you can sort of maybe leave the online space and become into the material space, into the galleries.
Well, my brother told me years ago, and he studied it. He has scholarship. He's incredible. He comes from really poor background, and he was able to get scholarship offers from Yale. He was a genius, but he ended up getting scholarship offers from Parsons in Paris and in New York, and he graduated. Incredible. But he was one that actually would give me a lot of the insight on the art business stuff. And one of the things he always said to me is like, the art is the art. It doesn't really mean nothing. At the end of the day, is the story behind the artist. So a lot of these artists, what they have to learn is that, again, like in hip hop, you have to pay your dues. You know, if you can't just go online with your artwork and really expect that people are going to invest in you, you have to have a story behind your work and why your work interprets that story. So like Basquiat and them, think about it. They got incredible stories, you know what I mean? And so people lack that. So nowadays you get these writers like, let's say, like, you know, they don't pay their dues on the streets and they want to be street artists. They want to be legendary, and they doing these commission walls and they doing these beautiful murals, but it's all legal walls. They're not pushing the envelope in society, which you know is a risk. You could get killed, you could go to jail, you could pay for your art. But listen, that's what's going to be your story later. When people go to collect, they got to see that, oh snap, this person did this. This person, you know, was wanted. You know, this person, you know, rocked the boat. This person changed this. This person created this. This person. So that's what the people are doing now, and they still hitting trains and stuff and all that. They opening their path for the future to be able to take those same stories, use those pictures, use those stories to then develop their artwork so that a consumer will have more than just something beautiful to look at. You understand?
100%.
So it's the substance. So I think that's what's happening with me. As you know, as we talk, that we could talk on forever, I got enough to fill 100 books. So it makes my story incredible. So I could say I've been in the gallery my first year, signed with them, and we had a show, and I addressed their consumers in an open dialogue. So they got to know me, and they got to know, like, hold up, this dude right here, you know what I'm saying? He has an interesting story. I want a piece of that. You understand? So that's really what it's about. And I think a lot of artists have to understand that it's not just how beautiful or how good you are, it's the story behind the artist. You know, like Mandela, when he came out from jail, came out of jail, became an artist. You know, what's his name? Bob Dylan. He's a big artist now. You know, I was dealing with a company out there that distributes his prints. You know, and he does, you know, but Bob Dylan, look at his story, you know, Mandela, look at that story. Of course you want to collect that piece of work. You know, Basquiat, of course I want to collect that work. You know what I'm trying to say? So you got to have that story, man. You got to risk
people want to be personally invested, don't they? They want to have, as you said, they want a piece of, like, a piece of history sort of thing. They want a piece of the story, and it can only be done if they're personally invested in you, which is why, like, certain, like, people will jump on trends and copycat styles, and it doesn't work, because you need that, like, your experiences. And this is why I like culture. This is why I use the term culture so much. Is because I feel like I use the word culture very differently to the actual, like, definition. My version of culture is you as an individual, your personal background, like an amalgamation of all your experiences, all your friendships, all your relationships, all your everything that you've came in contact with is an accumulation, and you are the embodiment of that. And then with artists, whether it be musical or what yourself do, and it's like it all floods out, doesn't it? It comes out onto the canvas, and I think you can see the authenticity behind it. The majority of the time, because as I say, there are some copycats out there.
Big time. They get commercial, and then they get backed up. But they can be, you know, and then you know, two things. What you just said, like, think of like the Marvin Gaye's and those guys, and think about the music that never runs out. That could be generational and generational. That's the example. But what did they have to go through? You understand? To give that, even the Prince and you know, you look at Purple Rain, it wasn't, you know, he paid his dues, you know what I mean? He went through suffering, and that comes out in your art form, and that's what touches somebody. So you got to really be able to connect with people. But like you said too, then what happens is, like the industry, you'll have thousands of other people just, you know, doing stuff. And yeah, one or two will get picked by somebody and made famous and blown up. But that's like throwing the dice, you know what I mean? You don't know. It's like a basketball player. How many, like I remember when Jordan came out, how many street ball players were better than Jordan? You know what I mean? Doing stuff in the streets. Nobody ever heard about them. You know what I mean? Never, unless you was in the streets and knew that these dudes could actually, you know, whip these pro players, you know, 1,000 times over. Same thing with any genre. So yeah, that's what it really comes down to, is really like that. So I think that my success now is for what I paid for, you know, in my youth, in my time. Yeah. You know what I mean? So
but nobody's willing to put that time in now. It's like, and I think that's the problem. Like we've hit the nail on the head there. Is nobody's willing to. It's this social. We said it throughout. Is the social media sort of culture, the fast pace of these lifestyles. Nothing is going to stand the test of time. We talk about the music that even I still listen to now was from 30 plus years ago. It was before I was even born, and like nowadays, no disrespect, but you've got like the 6ix9ines and things like that. Are people going to be listening to them in 30 years? I don't think so. Yeah, exactly. So it's what will stand the test of time, and normally, yeah, that authenticity will shine through. You can't. I always say it's not sustainable if it's a facade. You can't sustain a facade. One day that facade will crack, and then boom, it's all gone. You know what I mean? So if you're true to yourself and you're authentic and you're sustainable and disciplined and you stay true to yourself, it's bound to happen.
I agree 100%. That's how I live my life.
100%, 100%. No, I really, and there must be a sense of pride as well that obviously, like, after all this time, you're in the art galleries, but alongside like the names that you mentioned, like Picasso, like everybody in the world knows who Picasso is. Do you know what I mean? Like it's one of them names in that transcend art. Do you know what I mean? It's not just the artists who know about it, like mainstream people know about it, and your work is alongside his, and that must be like a sense of pride.
But it's a sense of pride, but not necessarily for myself. Like I said, it's a sense of pride for this subculture that I made who I am. You understand? So I don't represent myself really. I represent that, and I'm representing the ones that got wiped out with the crack epidemic and AIDS epidemic. And I'm talking about thousands and thousands that made this culture that the world is enjoying today at the ultimate sacrifice. Don't have that voice, don't have that authenticity out there. I represent that. So that's what the pride is. It's not about me at all, ever. And it's been always about the culture. And again, the ones my art is their art. You understand?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
They next to Picasso's. You know what I mean? They next to, you know, it's not really me. It's like I'm just the vehicle. I'm just part of them. You know, I'm really repping them. So that's where the pride really comes in, is to say to them in a spiritual sense, is like, yo, we did it, B. We did it.
We all made it. But I think it's really nice because, as I say throughout this podcast, I've talked to a lot of like Indians who are in spaces which aren't traditionally Indian places to be in, like sports athletes and things like that, which we're not really represented in them spaces. And I say to a lot of them is the importance of having representation is unfathomable, because there's going to be a kid who is like yourself and will want to do what you are doing, but until you see it to believe it, and when they see it, they will believe it, and it's then achievable. Do you know what I mean? And it's so powerful.
You just gave me goosebumps head to toe. You said it. When I work with these young kids, that's really what it is. I mean, I suffered in this art thing. I lost everything. I lived on a couch, and I live within my studio. I mean, life ain't glory all the time for me, but it's that right there, is knowing that the mission I'm in is not about me. It's bigger, and and there's a lot of people like myself that we didn't have those pioneers that broke the barrier. There was no hope for us. Like even the Basquiats, and when I mentioned them, even the Dozes and my brother and all these people, it's amazing to see what they did, because again, what would I have been? You know, I would have been dead or locked up, and nobody would have known nothing. You know what I'm saying? So I'm those kids, you know what I mean? So I feel you know. So you're absolutely right. It becomes to be a more of a social responsibility. And it's not even about race or class. It's just about generations coming. It could influence anybody, you know, and that's the power. It's not that you're saying, oh, I only want influence this group or this group. No, it's a whole global thing in which you don't know what fire you might spark. You understand? But you're going to spark a fire. And that's 100%. What matters, in a positive way, not in a negative way. And that's important, you know what I mean? To me, at least.
100%. And that's the powerful thing about art. It's always beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And it's always like, when you see something, it's always going to spark an emotion. Do you know what I mean? You get them feelings, which is it's really important. Which is why, like, I'm a very simple person, to be honest. I'm not a very complicated person. I see something nice, it intrigues me, and I want to speak to the person behind that. And that's what stemmed me talking to artists on this podcast, is because I don't know if you're aware of the farmers' protest that's happening in India at the moment.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure of how aware, like, mainstream media and global news is, because it's very much downplayed in this country, which is it's not nice to see. But from that, a lot of like artists from Indian descent have created some absolutely beautiful art pieces, because it's the inspiration, isn't it? Sometimes the art comes from, as you've said yourself, from these dark experiences in your past as well. And from that's how I've started to speak to artists on this podcast, is basically because I just seen something that attracted me, got my attention for more than the 5 seconds that anything else normally does in this fast-paced life. Made me stop and think, and then all these questions and ideas that came into my mind. So that's and I think
that changes you too. It's growth. That's growth in you.
100%. And then the beautiful thing was that, as when I got to speak to the artist behind it, my perception of what he was trying to say and what his perception of what he was trying to say were close, but there was very, like, distinct differences. And then when he was explaining it to me, when I was explaining to him how I viewed it, he was learning from me. But when he explained it to me, I was learning from him. And it's like, it's such a magical thing, or it is just, I don't know how to describe it, because, as I say, I'm a simple person. I ain't got this fancy vocabulary.
Nah. But you know what? And it's also the way, like, we connected, like Philly, for instance, who, you know, connected us. Look at what she's been doing, you know what I mean? And she's getting more of the experience that, she already had one coming from the UK, London and stuff, but now being where she's at and working in the project she's working, look how much even more she's evolved into taking on social issues, the art, and the different cultures she's meeting, and seeing the connections in our cultures, as well as how we utilize traditionally that magic into, like, making the world a better place. You know what I'm saying? You know, 100%. even if it's just in our minds, but we are making the world a better place, you know? And that's the ultimate goal that we should all be living, right? It's just, if we could just contribute, we don't have to change the world, but let's do our little part, each of us, you know, and it'll, you know, it's a chain reaction. And whether you interviewing or doing whatever, is all a part of the same energy, the same, you know, we all need each other. It's all energy exchange. It's the love, you know what I mean, for something beyond ourselves, you know what I'm saying? So, and that's magical, you know, in my views, you know.
100%. If everybody always says it, like, you hear it all the time, if your work ever inspires one person, just that one person, then it's worth it. Do you know what I mean? Because then they could go on to inspire one person, and like you said, it's a chain reaction.
What did Tupac famously say in one of the interviews before he died? He said, you know, I won't change the world, but I guarantee you I'll spark that brain that will. You know what I mean? And that's hip hop, you know what I'm saying? That should be the goal. You know, not that everybody has it, obviously, but in everything you do, it should really be beyond yourself. And when you put it beyond yourself, the rewards that come are unimaginable. You know what I mean?
100%. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned so much about New York. I feel like I was actually there instead of just watching it on TV through some of your stories. It's been magical. But just before we finish, I asked the same 5 questions to every single guest. They're in a quick fire sort of fashion. So like, whatever first comes to your mind, and it's like normally a word to a sentence. So number 1 is, what are you most proud of?
What I'm most proud of, I would say raising a family, producing children into this world. And I would say I'm proud of like everything we talked about, like where I came from. I wouldn't really change anything because then I wouldn't be where I'm at and I wouldn't know what I know from a firsthand perspective. So I'm proud. I'm proud of the man I become. I evolve more and more towards positiveness and love and peace, coming from a gang background, coming from a lot of violence and a lot of things I've seen. So I'm proud that I'm able to mature out of that. I'm proud that people look up to me, not look up to me, but look at me as a good example. You know, that's what makes me feel good because it makes me feel like a real man. Like I can walk around with my head up and be dignified. You know what I mean? So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the image I'm portraying. I'm putting out to the world. The energy. That's what I'm most proud of.
Number 2 is, what are you most looking forward to?
Sky's the limit. Hip hop is like what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward like getting a lot of these stories out, maybe more visual, get into some films and stuff. A lot of people have been asking me for books and films and stuff like that. So I think the universe has opened that up. So I really, to be honest with you, I'm riding the wave. I'm just looking forward to enjoying life. I want to move to somewhere Caribbean and, you know, live off the land, you know, create a community, you know, build a community, be a part of building a community in which we could live more indigenous and not have to be caught up in this crazy cycle and go back to being who we are as what nature and earth wanted us to be, which is take care of it, work with it, and still do my art and make people happy.
Number 3 is, what is your biggest motivation?
My biggest motivation, again, it goes back to all of that, is where I come from and where I could take those experiences to. And yeah, basically.
Yeah. What is your definition of success?
Success is happiness and peace, I think. That's my definition. It's not necessarily materialistic. It's how you feel inside. If you can wake up every day and be happy and grateful, give thanks to your food, give thanks. Yeah, just being grateful and humble and, you know, and knowing that you're not above anything or anybody. You just, you know, you equal to and you connect. So yeah, so I'm most grateful that I'm able to do that.
100%. And last but not least, because it's the KultureKast podcast, how has your culture affected you in your journey thus far?
Oh, it's been everything. I mean, I've lived hip hop all my life through every part of it. So yeah, it's just it continues to be my motivation. It's hip hop. I'm hip hop. You know, I watch breakdancing videos every day. I go to see DJs, spin 45s, and I still traditional hip hop, man. So it's still the street culture. I'm still motivated. Not this street culture that people see today, like necessarily gang culture, but the music, the art culture more of organic. You know, I'm getting exposed to more international cultures, which is just blowing my mind. I love the music in different places, even if I don't understand the lyrics. You know, you get some Brazilian stuff, some African stuff, some Indian stuff. It's like, yo, this shit's dope. You know what I mean? So I'm not still like a big kid. I'm still just enjoying stuff and having a good time. You know,
Best way to be.
Yes, indeed. I'm like 53-year-old kid, man. It's crazy.
100%. 53 years young, we'll say.
Yeah, that's it. Still going. I think I got another 50 going. Oh man. Jesus Christ.
No, it's so good. Honestly, I have to ask the last question because it is like the same 5 questions I ask everybody. But I feel like we've spoken so much about the culture throughout the podcast that I already knew what the answer was going to be by the end of it. Do you know what I mean? But it's just one of them formalities that I have at the end of the podcast just to ask it one more time. But no, honestly, this has been amazing. Like again, shout out to Philly for putting us into contact and
thank you to you too. Definitely.
Thank you for your time, man. Honestly, I really appreciate this, and we've went for like around 2 hours now.
Wow, really? I told you that was gonna happen. Didn't I tell you?
Yeah. I think it's like 2.5 hours almost.
I'll start talking and forget it.
It's fascinating. Honestly, it is really, really fascinating. Like everybody is in their own bubbles. Like you can really create like your own bubble sort of thing. So when you're speaking to so many different people with so many different perspectives, so many different backgrounds, it's just so fascinating because you become outside your bubble and that veil gets pierced almost. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I experience all the time. Yeah, I love it.
100%. But yeah, I will leave links and things to your socials that you've been forced to set up in the description below, to your website and things.